While the ruthless north wind was blowing, the guy managed to hide in a cave, which was hard to see the human eye due to snow. But he was deeply mistaken, thinking that he would go unnoticed, because he was soon found and forced to leave his shelter. Strangers were interested in only one question: where the relic? Zick Draker just laughed in the face of these fools, and simply asked if they themselves would tell someone if they knew where this treasure was. Such an answer, it seems, even more angry strangers, because the terrible swear to which they called the guy simply did not stop. They threatened to deprive him of his life. One of the sights calmed down a little, said that they need to contact the main detachment and report their coordinates, as well as the fact that the Northern Phantom is already in their hands. They looked with hatred at Zika, and did not understand how the guy was still conscious, and even keeps on his feet, because he had no both hands. The guy himself simply boiled inside with anger, because these two stupid creatures did not even imagine who they contacted, and it would be better for them to just leave him alone. Up to two strangers, they could not calm down, and decided to mock the poor fellow well until the main detachment was getting tired of them. They already, by virtue of their meager mind, came up with torture for the guy, and chuckled maliciously, looking in his direction, not suspecting the approaching danger. But after a minute, something happened that the Woe Warriors did not expect. The North Phantom raised his hands from the ground, and in some magically they again grew to the shoulders. Zick was by no means going to sit still and calmly listen to the insults of these two in his direction. He did not have such a difficult path for this. He was the first to be unsuccessful in the famous Dracy family, the murderers of the dragons, and due to the fact that his body was unable to use aura, he could not wake up. This was the main reason why his family simply threw a guy out of his parental house, and then he tried alone just to survive, and tried his best to become stronger. But it was not for nothing that Zick remembered one old proverb, which stated that if everything that a person strives for is just power, then soon he would remain with anything. While he was thinking, two strangers threw a coin to solve their dispute, who would be the first to mock the Northern Phantom while he is so vulnerable. The coin shone in the air and silently sank to the back of the palm of one of the men. Finally, their dispute will be solved. The coin fell up, and one of the strangers smiled maliciously, because he was finally lucky, and he will be the first. Now the Phantom would ask for mercy. They had already prepared to thoroughly beat the guy, using his condition, but they had to rush, because the main detachment would soon join them. But these two did not take into account the main thing. The Phantom's hands were already in place. He looked at them with his eyes full of contempt, and there was not a drop of fear in these eyes. One of the strangers simply dumbfounded with horror, because Phantom began to advance, preparing for battle, and it looked rather scary. The strong will crush and take away everything that is possible. It was the most honest truth in this world. In the next moment, the striker received a blow and sharply flew to the side, because he did not expect at all that the North Phantom will be so aggressive and strong. They thought that it was great to beat the guy, but everything happened quite the opposite, because it was precisely smuggest strangers that were beaten. It seemed that Zick simply went crazy. He was no longer afraid of anything, and his eyes were simply hatred of these two people. The strangers finally realized that it would not be possible to escape. It only remained to hope that they would be alive at all. By this time, the rest of the group arrived at the cave, and the arrivals were also in full shock of what they saw. It finally became clear to everyone that they do not deal with a simple person, because he can regenerate his body after terrible injuries. One of those present thought out loud about whether this strange guy could return his head to his place if he was chopped off. The rest of the team rushed into battle with the Northern Phantom, in the hope that in a few minutes it will be defeated. But how much they were all mistaken. The guy was not of a timid dozen, and even for a second did not lose his confidence. No matter how hard he tried, but the forces were still unequal, so after half an hour, Zick received many wounds and could not get up from his knees. A few minutes later, and collecting all his strength into a fist, the guy rose and looked around. Strangers already caught a trace, but he also beat them well. He looked with horror at his hands, his fingers barely unclenched, but still Zick could move them, and this meant a lot. Even though he could not take revenge properly, a weak smile appeared on his face, and only he himself knew its real reason. Zick unclenched his palm and realized that he managed to steal a relic, which the Emperor hunted for, so that his death would not be completely in vain. The guy closed his eyes again. His head was spinning from many wounds, and it seemed that he was saying goodbye to life. Having clenched the relic in his hand even more, the guy mentally asked for forgiveness from his Alicia for 1,000th time. But then something strange happened. The figure in his palm began to glow with a strange bright light. Real magic took place. It seemed that some strange magical power came out of the fiery relic, and this spirit was little like a good wizard, Rather, it was a real monster. Right from nowhere, the guy heard the words that the soul of an ancient dragon was captured in the will of the one who constantly persists and goes to his goal. The voice said that an urgent measure was adopted by the highest forces, but now the only one is necessary. This is the consent of Zika Draker himself. It seemed to the guy himself that he was gradually going crazy. Once he hears different voices that call him to make a decision, he doesn't care. Let them do what they want. The countdown began, and in a few seconds the force was activated, on which Zik agreed in unconsciousness. Now he looked like that. The guy hardly understood what was happening to him now, why he looked like a teenager, and his real image gradually dissolves in the air. After a couple of minutes, he generally teleported and ended up on the bed in a large room, and for some reason she seemed to him painfully familiar. The place in which the Zik got turned out to be the training center of the Draker family called Cradle, which is why it was familiar to him. These are the possessions of his native family. The genus of the Drakers was very famous in these parts, because its members were murderers of dragons, and were considered one of the 3 great transcendental families on the continent. Takankan Draker, the ancestor of Zika, is an ancient hero who saved the continent, the Safen of the treacherous dragon of Bagamut during the war thousands of years ago. After the death of Tarakan, his clan united in order to continue to fight the dragons, and soon the elders decided to establish the Dracy family. Absolutely all members of the Drare family had a common ability. They owned the blessing of the aura. It may have happened because they were descendants of the hero. This gave members of the family a unique ability. They have the opportunity to awaken their high-level aura and become valiant knights. But, as it turned out later, this ability had this ability except one family member, and it was precisely Zik Dracy, who was just an ordinary person. He again heard a strange voice, who said that the system was rebooting, and a few minutes later said that the soul of the awakened confirmed and set up 100%. Zik turned out to be chosen, not understanding it himself. The soul of the chosen awakened received the will of the ancient dragon and completely merged with him into a single system. On the virtual screen, he saw all the information and finally realized what happened. It turned out that he activated the relic, which he had so much preserved in recent battle. Then the guy got acquainted with the system and read detailed information about his skills. Now he received the blessing of the dragon and was in the rank of healers. It turned out that now he has strange abilities. For example, his hand can pass through matter, and Zik can move around the virtual world. Then the guy realized that in addition to everything, he still knows the language of dragons. But so far, he did not quite understand why he needed such a skill, because such a language is not used in his world now. He remembered that the teacher told him about this, that in ancient times people divided themselves into classes, depending on what they were especially good in. Each class is trained in special equipment known as the skill, and since its class relate to healers, it can use the gift of healing. If you believe what he sees in the monitor of this strange tablet, then he is already a healer and can use this ability at any time. Zik decided that it would be nice to test this option in order to make sure that the state written in the state exactly corresponds to reality. In his past life, he became a healer when he was 20 years old, immediately after he discovered the Ether Hall. Bright pictures from his past life began to emerge again in his memory, and the guy realized that it was worth drawing some parallels so that the puzzle would have developed correctly. He was always distinguished by a sharp mind, so it was not difficult, having folded all the facts, to understand that at the moment his Ether Hall is already open. Once everything develops as he thinks, this means that he opens up with many opportunities to put everything in its place. Despite the fact that his trained body was no longer there, but he returned to his past with his skills and strange memories. Compared to who he was in his regression, now the guy was in a more favorable position, and this was extremely happy. But there was another problem, because in order to find out what he is capable of in this position, it was necessary to find out what was at his disposal. So far, the guy did not know how to do this and where to start. Therefore, he sat most of his time in his room and thought a lot. Someone knocked on the door, and Zik tried to hide his virtual tablet somewhere, so that no one could see that he owned strange abilities. Without waiting for permission to enter, the only servant of Zika, an elderly but very stylish man named Deer, entered the room. The man began to reproach the guy for the fact that he had not yet gathered, and Zik, in turn, was delighted that Deer did not see virtual tablets. He asked the man why he was so angry, and he in turn did not understand why the boy was in no hurry. It is very irresponsible. Zik thought for a moment that when he was small, he was really afraid of this frowning and always displeased man. And now let him have not been 5 years old for a long time. A sense of fear has not left him for a very long time, and now he has a skill that provides for a calm and cold mind. The servant, whom Zik now considered his assistant, could not understand why the young master forgot about such an important event. It sometimes seemed to a man that this boy never listens to him at all, and he needed to repeat everything twice, or even more. But Zik at that time thought deeply. Probably Deer now had in mind the evolutionary pancreatic dough, otherwise where to rush so much. All dryers are trained in the training center of the cradle. Starting from 7 years and for 5 years, they have strict basic training. The instructor appoints rivals, but there are times when the students themselves choose who to fight with, provided that both duels will agree. But since it is precisely this competition that determines the class in which students of the academy will be enrolled, children have no other choice but to fight from all their strengths. As everyone knew, it was on this day that the main competitions of pancration were assigned, and the stadium was already prepared for spectators and rivals. The judge said that he believes that all participants in the competition are aware that right now, the last component of the assessment will be credited. All participants stood at the rack quietly and carefully listened to the judge. Each of them was scared, but at the same time everyone wanted to win. The judge decided to cheer up young people a little and wished each of them good luck, not forgetting to remind you that in no case should you lose heart and be afraid. After the senior instructor Panmark gave all valuable instructions, a group of young people in chorus replied that they were clear, and they are ready for any tests. But suddenly in the crowd they began to whisper, because one of those present saw the Zika Draker among the contestants. He again appeared here after last year's humiliation. The first contest began, and the judge called 2 participants, Aaron and Gotu, who immediately went down to the field. After the whistle, which denoted the beginning of the battle, 2 young people attacked each other. They competed without weapons, in their fists. Each of these 2 participants sincerely believed that he could easily defeat the enemy, because so much strength and patience were invested in training. From the stands, they carefully watched what was happening. One of the participants concluded that the result of the battle was long clear, because one of the players took a bad position for protection. Gotha can no longer fight. As a result, Aaron defeated the enemy, and Zik, this has long provided, but in his opinion, both guys were well prepared. At some moment, the young man even became a little boring to observe everything that was happening. He even began to yawn, which greatly infuriated one of the participants, who was sitting and only doing that he watched Zim. His name was Leon, and already in the face of this participant it was clear that he was a fairly aggressive player. All he needed was to throw his negative outward, beat his participants. The judge called Zika and Leon on the field. The latter had already scratched his hands to fill someone's face and ultimately win a duel. Zik had already reconciled with his fate. He guessed that fortune would present him an unpleasant surprise in the form of this abnormal Leon, but there was no choice but to stand in battle. It didn't matter to the guy better or worse if he was behaving in battle, because Zik clearly decided that today he would not repeat last year's mistakes, and will certainly win. But for some reason, last year's battle surfaced in memory, and the irony of fate last time, he fought with Leon, and then ultimately lost shamefully. Today Zik was sure that Leon touched everything, how that Dreker again turned out to be his opponent. His family members believed that his son should be able to do dirty tricks in order to become a real dragon killer. In his past life, 4 brothers and sisters in a direct genealogy never had the slightest opportunity to meet. But it was strange that in addition to their native brothers and sisters in the family, there were more dozen cousins, and they were quite aggressive. Each of these relatives only dreamed of breaking direct heirs of the family or making some other dirty tricks. And Zik was not only no exception, on the contrary, he was beaten the most and was terribly mocked at any opportunity. And now, Leon reminded the guy how he disgraced last year, having suffered a crushing failure because he was considered inferior. The guy tried to calm down and remembered that now he owned steep abilities, such as, for example, a calm mind, so he remained cold, blooded. He simply warned his opponent that if he did not stop behaving like an idiot, then he would not stand on ceremony with him. Leon did not expect such a reaction from last year's jackhole, so he began to act even more aggressively and dismissed his hands. When Zik heard another insult in his direction, he decided to immediately apply the activation of the critical blow skill. And Leon did not expect this at all a powerful blow, because he was faithful in the fact that he was facing a helpless guy whom he would beat again. Zik, in turn, looked at his hand and simply dumbfounded, because she glowed with some strange light and there was a lot of unbridled power in it. The skill manifested itself as soon as the guy swung at Leon, and in a matter of seconds the judge ran up to them and shouted that he had not yet announced the beginning of the battle. But Zik protested, because no one says to start attention march on the battlefield. The advantage is always among the one who will hit the enemy first. The judge also did not expect that the boy would begin to be indignant. He remembered Zika since last year, and did not think that he could change so much and succeed in battle. Leon with difficulty rose from the ground. His frightened eyes expressed complete bewilderment. How this guy could fight and keep a blow so well. The man carefully asked Leon if he could continue to compete, to which he replied that everything was in order with him. But the order was not smelled there, because the enemy, after the blows received, was difficult to stay on his feet, and blood dripped from a broken nose. A terrible anger gradually appeared in Leon's eyes, and finally gathering his strength, he shouted that he was going to kill this arrogant Dryker. The enemy's words seemed ridiculous to Zik. He thought that he taught this impudent enough understandable lesson, and probably should be repeated. They began to make noise in the stands, watching what was happening, because no one could believe that in the year, Zik Dracy was able to tighten his level of skill so much. The guys in the arena continued the battle, and it cannot be said that Leon was really bad in battle. He also inflicted accurate and crushing blows. But the whole point is that Zik Dracy did not feel them at all. His system activated more and more abilities, and the guy did not feel pain. Zik concluded that if he is constantly on his guard, then the enemy would generally cease to pose any threat to him. Leon was also not going to give up, because he possessed a hand-to-hand combat technique well, and did not want to disgrace himself to his friends. Therefore, at one point he made a successful capture and tried to tie Zika to the ground, taking advantage of that he looked around. A terrible fight started again. Even the judge could not understand which side the winnings were now on, and who would win. Striving at the Ziku, Leon did not forget to insult him and call him an inferior warrior, but this did not offend the guy. When Leon was about to inflict the next blow, Zika was again activated by combat capacity, and he first hit the enemy so that he flew away. Zik smiled. Finally, they would take him seriously, and he will be able to prove that he is capable of a lot. Let him be afraid. Then the judge intervened. Even he did not expect from the guy such clear and tough blows. A 12-year-old guy should not be able to fight like that at all. But there was a moment when Leon began to actively attack, and for a few minutes the man thought that Zik would lose, as the last time. However, this did not happen, because at a convenient moment the dryer dodged and struck Leon with his fist in his chin, and thereby released from his grip. No one believed his eyes. Each of those present in the stands doubted whether it was Zik Dracy whom they knew before. Leon was simply furious, and the most interesting was that he could not do anything. No matter how hard he tried, Zik was constantly better. And Dracy, in turn, understood that it was necessary to create a distance between them. Then the situation was the best way for him. Leon was already exhausted enough, but he did not want to show a look. He could not lose this coward in front of everyone. He attacked each time, and with each new time his strength was less and less, and Zik, meanwhile, learned to control his abilities. And the guy remained awake and confident, as it turned out. To manage abilities is not so difficult, rather even pleasant. Now that he completely owns himself, with his feelings and actions, you can present the next lesson to this impudent. This could not continue further, so Zik decided that Leon himself, as well as all the spectators in the stands, was more to torment himself. All Leon's friends, as well as those who came to look at a relative of the Dracy family, have long realized that he could not get victory today. Zik, at first, without expecting it, this time turned out to be much stronger and more agile than his opponent, and right now he struck him a final blow. The skill of the exact blow that the guy now owned was in the weakest places of the enemy to cause critical damage. The audience in surprise even stood up in the stands to better see what was happening in the arena. For some reason, Ziku at that moment was not at all sorry for his opponent. Let Shadameric Leon remember this day for his whole life. Then the guy turned to the audience, who still stood in a daze, and asked them not to stare, but to go down and, if desired, express everything right in his face. He is no longer that weak and insecure boy, whom they all love so much. Now Zik in my head has become in its place, and the situation is cleared up a little. Everyone continued to stare at the battered Leon. He in turn looked at the crowd and shouted irritably so that everyone stopped staring and diverged home. Zik Dracy also examined those present and shouted to the crowd, "If someone wants to tell him something, let him go down and do it. Look into his eyes. Stop discussing him behind him." Another guy came out of the crowd while his gaze was very brave and straightforward. He came closer to the arena and examined the winner from head to toe. This was another cousin of Draker. The guy's name was Jacob Wardk, and he also decided to call the guy to a duel. This arrogant upstart decided that since Leon could not win, he would do this, and he would definitely take revenge on his relative. Zik calmly reacted to this situation and asked Jacob to go down from the rostrum and take another fighter with him. It will be very boring to fight with one Jacob, so let the guy take his servant Liam Stone. Zik shouted to his new opponent that now he would have at least some chance of victory. But this is of course not a fact. Jacob's eyes flashed real fury because just his cousin humiliated him in front of everyone. Now he will have to solve the problem on the battlefield. It seemed that the guy simply was boiling with hatred of the Dryker, and he would quickly wanted to smear this upstart on the ground, which he planned to do in the next minutes. When two guys went to the arena, the judge immediately warned that without his permission, the battle could not be started. The man will definitely give a sign when he will be considered necessary, and when to make sure that opponents are ready for a real battle. In a last life, Liam Stone was a servant of Jacob and studied at the cradle of the academy. The guy remembered him well. But since he was a distant relative, the older relatives decided to leave the guy without education, and he begged for admission to the higher educational academy. But in the end result, Liam entered the knightly order of a small state called Baranon and received good training there. As soon as Baranon fell, the guy became a mercenary. Well, in troubled times, people reach strong. So after a long stay as a mercenary, he became a Red Knight and founded his guild called Stone's Mercenaries. Under his beginning, he united the largest groups of mercenaries, which is why he was nicknamed the King of Mercenaries. Then, when the Empire hired the mercenaries of Stone, Liam entered the Continental Wars, and Zik, along with the Northerners, ran into him on the battlefield. But now everything could have developed differently, because there is not a war, not a battlefield, but ordinary competitions for the first place. Zik carefully examined his opponents, and once again reminded them that the guys should attack him under the condition of this round. The guy was so confident in himself that he clearly understood on which side there would be a victory, and now absolutely nothing scared him. Jacob only snorted, and then laughed, said that he was not going to play along with a cheap focus of Zika. After the sign of the judge, the guy was the first to run to the striker, and decided to strike him with his foot in the body of the body. The striker was confident that Zik would immediately collapse from such a blow to the ground, but something went wrong, because the dryer remained invulnerable. He looked at the enemy with a mockery, and joked that it was worth it to look around good before the blow. These words generally brought the enemy out of balance. Jacob Wardeck was more and more angry and lost his temper. It was necessary to end this circus. Well, the guy did not succeed. Zik Dracy continued to remain on his feet, and cleverly dodged from the blows that rained down on him from all sides. Then the guy decided to activate his superpower and show these two insolents what a real duel is. And in the eyes of the enemy, Zik finally saw out of fear. Jacob was no longer so confident in his victory. He reminded the enemy that he warned that he needed to attack him immediately together. Maybe then there would be at least some result. And so let not wait for mercy, because today Zeke Dracy wants to show everyone the present what he is capable of. In order not to disgrace Jacob Vardeck at the end, Liam shouted to his servant to join the battle. He screamed so that Liam would go down to the ring and help him to kill this self-confident insolent. Liam Stone was the same age as the rest, but the fact is that the scope of his hands was more than others, and it was a little alarming. Zik Draker was ready for this opponent will be more serious, and he could not do anything if Liam Stone attacks the first. Therefore, the guy decided to immediately take the initiative into his own hands and rushed into battle with completely despair, from which he was supposed to leave the winner. A whole flutter of blows fell on the enemy, because Zik decided to apply several of his superpowers and demonstrate them on the enemy. He decided to use the technique of Northern Fist Battle, which was used in medium lands, and tactics worked 100%. Although Zik learned to control his abilities, it was hard to fight with Liam Stone. He did nothing, really. He had already begun to choke. But the reason was not only in Zik, but also in the monstrous physical preparation of Liam himself, who did not apply counterattacks, but simply endured and did not lose vigilance. Now Ziku was clear how strong the enemy's body was. His task was to get Liam out of control. It was necessary to use more and more superpowers. Otherwise, the battle could have been in a few minutes. And of course, Zik would have lost. The next blow was to be accurate and crushing, but Stone once again deftly dodged, and the guy's hand just slipped on the shoulder. The situation began to annoy the guy, and it would be necessary to bring the matter to the end. But the stolen Liam Stone did not give up. The struggle was only tightened, and the audience was even afraid to take a breath, so as not to be distracted from the arena where everything happened. It was difficult to consider who wounded whom, but it was already noticeable that someone was smashed his nose or jaw. There were blood splashes everywhere. Understanding that the matter was bad, Zik decided to turn on heavy artillery and activated the class skill that caused heated feelings. He deftly grabbed Liana Stone's neck with his feet. It didn't matter how strong his body had, but no one could hold out for a long time without oxygen. About half a minute passed, and Zik began to understand that his opponent's body was weakening much. He clearly lacked oxygen, and he was breathing heavily. The enemy's face became like some kind of mythical demon. His eyes burned with real fire, and it seemed that they could burn everything in their path. The audience had already left their stands and began to approach the arena in order to better consider how this terrible fight would end. But then at one moment, Liam Stone intercepted the initiative into his own hands, and not even expecting himself from himself, he knocked Zika to the ground. He smiled wryly and said with the confidence of the winner that it was finally time to destroy Zika Draker once and for all. Decker cautiously knocked on the door and, without waiting for an answer, entered the room. He asked Zika to allow him to measure his pulse. The guy did not look at his butler, but perfectly understood that he wanted to know whether Zik awakened his aura. After a few seconds, Zik rolled the sleeve of his shirt and held out his hand, which glowed with pale blue servant. When they check whether someone had superpowers, they usually look at the wrist, but Decker approached this case more thoroughly. The butler perfectly understood that not all knights are the same. They are divided in accordance with their combat skills and the ability to control the aura. The white swordsman meant the level of a beginner. Most children before the rite of blessing are precisely white swordsmen. At the level of the yellow swordsman are those who managed to awaken their aura and open their superpowers. Such were all the students of the cradle. As soon as they got the opportunity to freely control the aura, they could already get the title of a knight without any problems. At the level of purple knights, they had the opportunity to strengthen their sword with an aura and get additional abilities. Then the kingdom of those who reached the very top began. This was the king of the mercenaries Liam, as well as Zik before he regressed. It is precisely those who reached the very top that the people called the Red Knights, that such people used all the benefits and honor of society. But how it happened that such an experienced person as Deer became the personal nanny of Zika Draker, the guy hoped that the man was not able to notice his broadcast. After all, only 2 people in the whole world can use this ether, and Zik knew this very well. The butler once again carefully looked into the guy's eyes and asked if it was possible that the young master was hiding something from him. The butler had to not ask a question, so he had to ask why Zik had changed only now, after so much time. But the guy in response also asked the man if that important information was hiding, but then he stopped stopping and said that he was just joking. Now everything will change and will stand on its rightful places, and all that Deer should do is just to follow Zim and help him. In turn, Deer said that he had prepared for the guy a training hall, which he had been asking for a long time, and now the guy can do. Walking along the deserted corridor, Zik was thinking about who exactly ordered the Deeser to constantly look after him. It could not be a person from his mother. Returning to his room, the guy decided to relax a bit, and at the same time check the system. Perhaps there are some important updates. It turned out that there were still, during the battle, several more useful skills were activated, and the guy realized that his abilities were growing depending on the frequency of their use. The conclusion suggested with himself, it turns out that he had all this before, and if he finds out something new, then a new skill is added accordingly. But Zik Dracy could not understand one thing, that is the difference between the skill and the class skill, because they are activated similarly. And there were also a dragon skills, but it was not possible to display them, because for unlocking it was necessary to score 10 points. Something suggested Ziku that this skill and class tell him that he should be connected with the ancient relic, which he took from the cave. But he had little information. It was necessary to get into the dungeon, but only Violet Knights were allowed there. Okay, the only way out is to pick up a sword and train until the guy's body becomes stronger. He is a descendant of an ancient strong family, and he finds out why he regressed the past, and what kind of system he managed to get into. Only 2 forces are known in the world. This is the aura of knights and mana magicians. The knights strengthen their aura in the dungeons. Magicians control mana with the help of circles. These 2 forces are located at the opposite ends of the spectrum, so if you awaken one, then the other will remain inactive. But Ziku failed to arouse any power. His family expelled him, and during vagrancy he managed to meet the master, who gave the guy a lot of different knowledge about healing and the etheric hall. Thanks to the etheric hall, which the master developed, control the energy of nature, that is, the ether. As it turned out later, Zik Dracy became one of the few in this world who could use the ether so skillfully. He trained only 2 hours, but it seemed to the guy that he was about to faint from exhaustion and loss of strength. He had to activate healing. This supernavier was very rare, and the guy at first did not even suspect his existence until he met the master on his path. If he used it before people, then the guy would be treated as abnormal, which is why Zik could not use it during the battle with Liam. He had to hurry to recover as soon as he returned to his room. It was necessary to completely restore strength and pretend that everything was fine. Now that the forces were resumed and the guy became much easier, he could easily continue his training. The Dracy language perfectly understood that the superpowers are very good, but do not ignore your own body and its physical condition. Therefore, the guy decided that so far it would simply observe the situation, and especially the behavior of his butler. He needed more information. A few days later, rumors about Zik began to spread in the cafeteria of the cradle. They said that the guy became a completely different person. Some continued to call him a loser. Others began to be afraid and hoped that he would pacify stronger guys. Reina Tarun was one of the strongest at the academy, and all the recruits were afraid of him because the guy looked really terrible. Aries Zamina sat at the head of the table and led the dinner process. He warned the guy that even if he had no appetite, it was still better to eat before the battle. He said this in an absolutely calm voice, chewing meat with a sharp look examining all those present. The Turun did not take the words of the eldest seriously, and simply thought that he again began to bore and make out of himself a great boss. But when Zimina spoke that Turun had a pronounced inferiority complex, the guy jumped up from the table with force, throwing a knife to the floor. The rest simply watched the situation, had no idea how this scandal at dinner would end. Everything went too far. One of those present asked Turun what he was going to do, but she would not call on the battle of Zik Draker himself. He smiled and answered maliciously that even though Zik turned out to be a hero, however, when it came to swords, he would get a miserable sight, because the guy could not really hold him in his hands. Everyone supported this thought. The Drinder is so weak that he had to buy a special sword, because the usual for him was too heavy. Leon recalled that he lost Ziku. There was nothing wrong with him. He was just lucky to win in his pancration. Zik stood behind the wall and heard this conversation perfectly. The guy decided not to be silent and asked Leon to repeat it in his presence. If they really think so, then none of them has the right to be a knight of the Draker house. The guy picked up a sword with whom he trained the last days and slowly headed towards the exit from the dining room. In a duel on swords, unlike pancration, real iron swords are used, and this is the cause of most incidents in the cradle. In addition, it is here that the difference in students' skills is most clearly manifested. It is here that the ceremony begins, during which, finally it all started. The judge asked Zik Draker to go to the arena. Soon the competition was supposed to begin. The guy with a free gait confidently went to the center. In his hands he held a huge steel sword, which attracted the attention of absolutely all those present. Reina Turin also confidently headed to the center of the arena, and in her gaze it was clear that the girl was very serious. When both opponents entered the center of the arena, the judge said that in a few minutes the competition should begin, and his result would determine the future winner. Reina looked directly into Ziku's eyes and said that today she was choosing him with her opponent. She is confident in her victory. But this did not scare the guy at all. He only smiled and replied that he would consider the fight with the Reina Turun for honor. The girl drew attention to the ease with which a heavy steel sword holds in her hands, before he could not even raise it. She thought that in front of her there was far from the language of Draker from which she laughed, and which she mocked last year. His aura was completely different. But a minute later, she tried to remove these thoughts. Reina would not allow the guy to confuse her before the start of the battle. Zik Dracy kept himself in his hands, was cold and calm. He knew that he would cope, but the fight with the Knight of Lightning was a rather tense event. Reina Turun is known as a Lightning Knight. She was one of the knights who made a name during the Continental Wars. The girl was also one of the greatest rivals of the next generation. His rival was really good in his business, aroused her aura before the Rite of Blessing passed, and this happened several years ago. And now the guy needs to try very hard to show Reina Turun that he has long been not the little boy who always lost in battle. He has changed a lot. The judge announced the beginning of the battle, and the competition began. Both enemies began to move towards each other, holding heavy swords in their hands. He held on very well and deftly repulsed all the attacks of the opponent. He did not even feel the severity of the sword, and was completely concentrated in battle. He himself admitted that the Reina Turun was better and more experienced than it seemed to him, so he should not lose vigilance for a second. Rein was also concentrated. Besides, all the audience supported her, shouting different curses and insults toward Zika Draker. The defeated and humiliated Leon shouted the girl so that she would not stand on ceremony with Zik and finally kill him. Other spectators also watched the battle tightly, but unlike Leon, they noted good preparation of Zik Draker. Everyone understood that Reina Turun was not playing with his opponent at all now. She was really very difficult for her, because Zik turned out to be well prepared. Despite the fact that the guy held on very well, the girl felt the breaks in his aura perfectly, and this gave her more strength and self-confidence. Well, no matter how quickly she tried to take advantage of the moment, Zika's sword blocked her attacks, as if he had predicted the player's actions. And immediately another thing was opened. It was like a training battle designed for learning Zika Draker. For a few seconds the guy was even at a loss and almost lost his balance, but quickly gathered his will into a fist and continued the battle. A lot of time has already passed, but none of the rivals even thought of giving up. It was no longer like the game, but to the battle for survival. The district of the Turun lost a lot of strength, but was not even going to give up positions. She still hoped to defeat Zika Draker. The guy looked at her and understood how actively she studied when she was in the cradle. She beats honestly and values her reputation. But it was the principles and impeccable honor that restrained the girl in battle. She adhered to tactics that she always used, without violating traditions. And Zick Dracy thought why he should not help this girl get out of her shell and show his true nature. The guy began to act in a completely different way, and this praised the Rhine. She was furious and lost his vigilance. This could not be allowed. Zick decided to reduce the lag in just one reception. The girl understood this, but he did not need to underestimate her speed. During the battle, the Rhine Tarun learned all the habits of her opponent well. She fully recognized the fact that Zick is a good warrior. She had never come across such an experienced opponent. She appreciated it and respected in knights. Zick turned out to be worthy. But whatever one may say, one should win in this battle, and the winner will subsequently also be won. So she was not going to give up to the guy. It was time to finish this performance. So the girl gathered all her strength into a fist, made an attack and knocked out his sword out of Zick's hands. As expected from Rhine Tarun, she, as usual, did not use her aura, but the cadets most likely did not notice this. But when the Zika attack quickly approached her, she still resorted to the use of her superpowers, but they were barely noticeable. Previously, Reyna always promised that she would never use her aura during the battle, until it was at the Knights Academy. It was here that the girl was forced to give up her principles and do what the fighting technique requires a warrior. But here, everything went wrong as Reyna imagined before the battle. Because for some reason the general principles did not work. It was necessary to act according to the situation. At one of the moments, Zick Dracy struck a very sharp blow with his fist in the neck of the Reyna Tarun neck. The girl barely resisted her feet. After the second such blow, the Rhine realized that this was the end. She could not resist and sat down on one knee. Blood fell from her sponge. The audience began to scream from the stands. They were indignant because it was a fight on the swords. Why Zick uses fists? Zick understood that everyone was outraged to the limit, but he did not care. In the end, he won this battle. He even had a desire to help the girl get up from her knees, but having driven this thought, he asked Regina if she wanted to continue the battle. But getting to her feet, the girl realized that further battle was simply meaningless. She lost a lot of strength, and must admit that it was Zick who won this contest. In the stands, everyone simply howled with indignation because Regina Tarun was the best of the best. Why she lends herself to this small jump. A few weeks ago, Draker was considered the discharge of society, and now he defeated one of the talented pupils of famous families. He became a real warrior. It seemed that the whole castle simply blazing, and soon the fire would devour absolutely the entire structure, and just ashes would remain. Around the stones lay many wounded warriors. Some of them were already saying goodbye to life and simply cleaned them. Those who died were simply covered with sheets. Then they were attributed to the gorge and simply dropped from a great height into the abyss. Meanwhile, in the castle, the young man simply did not understand Abel, who in such a situation was sitting and calmly drank tea. Rumors from the Knights Academy have already reached the castle. A letter said that Zick Dracy defeated the best knight, Rhine Tarun. But the young man did not respond to this and continued to enjoy a delicious drink. This guy is so nervous and acts on her nerves. Finally, Abel got up from the table. It was necessary to somehow solve this problem named Zick Dracy. There was still a little time before the rite of blessing. Until the next full moon, you need to arrange everything, and it seems now is the right time to visit your family. Adele smiled mysteriously. It became interesting to him what awakening his younger brother Zick Dracy would have to go. Zika's victory at the competitions simply shocked everyone, because the guy just returned to the training center and resumed his training. And Zick himself really did not understand how it was so easy for him to become a red knight with such a body from a past life. He periodically went into the system and checked the line of his condition, where it was meant that he received a blessing of an ancient dragon and has a number of skills. He managed to increase the level of some skills, and this is all thanks to a duel. This could not but rejoice the guy. Deer said that in an hour they should already be on the main estate of the Drakers family. The guy was not a long time here, only in a past life. An hour later, the carriage was approaching a luxurious estate. Kucher said that they had almost arrived at the appointed place. But for some reason this did not please the guy. He never loved this place, although it belonged to the Dracy family and was located on the territory of the Duchy of Troy. Let the main residence of the family are located in the heart of the continent. In the fortress of 4 Seasons in the Middle Lands, the ceremony should be held in the main estate. It was here that the legend of the dragon killers originated, and it was here that the house was located, which people called the Dragon Den. In the main hall of the estates, everyone who was related to the family of the dragon's killers and waited for the appearance of the protagonist of Today. Zick never realized this, but all the spectators in the hall were famous people who were often written about in the Continental Information Messenger. Whatever their intentions would be, as soon as they all see that the guy could not awaken, then they will probably ignore him. Finally, Zika's gaze stopped at one of those present, and it was Abel. But why did he appear? what goals this impudent pursues. The guy, shaking his hand in the impudent, directly asked why he arrived in the dragon lair, to which he replied that he had good reasons for this. And the main of the reasons, of course, is his beloved younger brother Zick Dracy, whom Abel is glad to see again. Abel Dracy was not a simple knight. He was called a lion's blade, and in narrow circles he was often called a real butcher behind his back. Mentally, Zick asked himself to calm down and not react so abruptly to the words of his brother. In any case, now he could not do anything. In his past life, Abel Dracy would never have come to the family estate during the rite of the blessing of Zick. The guy felt completely out of place and mentally asked the highest forces to end as soon as possible, and he returned back to the guys. The family priest announced that the ceremony of the ceremony was starting right now, and Aaron should go into the hall so that everything is according to the ritual. A huge bowl of transparent liquid was introduced into the hall and put in the center. Everyone was just lurked with his breath, and Zick went to it and lowered his hand into the bowl. At first everything went on as usual, but then the Zika's hand and the liquid began to interact. Strange impulses began to be through the veins and gave it out in blue light. With the help of the rite of blessing, each representative of the genus Dracy arouses his sealed aura when time comes to leave the cradle. Compared to ordinary knights who wake up after 20 years, it was incredibly fast and does not create any problems. All the eyes went to the lamps of mana, and no one could understand what was happening to them. A beautiful glow of red flowed from them. This meant that the representative of the clan was awakening. He becomes a real knight, takes himself the color that he claims. Pure blood awakens in young people, and only then can they be called part of the genus Dracy, and the genus takes them into its house. The manager of the entire ceremony was silent for a little, smiled mysteriously, and asked his assistants to bring special gloves. Due to the suppression of mana, everyone will need the use of special gloves made by the family, otherwise he will not be able to live an ordinary life. When someone can prove that he is a purebred murderer of dragons, only then he is assigned the sacred name of Dracy, and he receives the support of this family. Finally, Zika's turn came. He walked slowly around the hall and all the eyes were attracted to him, because he was able to defeat the Rhine Turin to the Rhine. He walked very slowly, because this demanded a custom. Zick never thought that once again he would have to stand in front of this strange statue. The last time everything was frankly terribly speaking, because at that time the rite was the only thing that prompted him to go through the cradle and disgraced him. However, this time everything will be completely different, because he can now not only heal, but also manage the ether, and in addition proved himself in the arena during the competition. Therefore now he stood in front of this damned bronze figurine and asked her to take care of his future. It should be bright. And the statue seemed to hear absolutely all the thoughts of this young man. She stood and sent her pure energy to the guy. After a few more minutes, the entire ceremony of the rite ended. A slight noise swept across the hall, and those present began to talk among themselves. Abel stood on the balcony, far from everything. There it was convenient for him to watch what was happening and build his insidious plan. Zick was a little worried about the presence of so many spectators, and especially the presence of Abel, who directly shouted his eyes, made him out of himself. The guy felt his gaze throughout the ceremony, and it was completely unpleasant to him, despite the fact that Abel was his brother. Despite all the efforts of Zika, the awakening did not begin. Everyone again thought that he was a loser of the year and would never become a real Dryker. Everyone was interested in how he was able to defeat the Rhine Turin to the Sama. Probably he turned some cunning scam, but again disgraced his family. He simply lost all hope. But it was not particularly worried, because this was not the first time. Now everyone will laugh at him and calm down. In the next second, a bright red glow began to pour from the statue. The process of awakening was activated, and everyone just gasped in surprise. Red color meant only one thing, that Zick Dracy is a red knight, and belongs to the highest category of dragon killers. The terminal established a compound that is activated in the soul of the user, and it was worth it to go through all these circles of hell. Abel watched from the balcony of what was happening, and he was simply torn with anger that his brother combined so many excellent abilities. Now in their family he will not be the most powerful and influential, because the championship will be given to him to a sweet brother, who a year ago was a completely jack. And then the guy thought that from this moment in his life, everything would change dramatically. Everything would be completely different. It was a little red, so everything turned out to be true. He is a red knight, so Abel thought, looking from above at his younger brother. Zick thought that, of course, everyone here will have doubts about him, but he should be silent in this situation. Otherwise, it would only be worse. Everyone paid attention to the statue, which stood in a pillar and did not know anything, but people thought that it just broke, because Zick could not be red. Abel himself violated the silence, smiling maliciously. He asked why everyone here is so sad, because two purebred just awakened before their eyes. This is a real reason to celebrate, arrange a feast, and congratulate the purebred knights who managed to awaken today. And of course, the audience supported the words of Abel Draker. And why not? Because this is a great reason to have fun in the circle of famous people. The manager of the ceremony once again reminded his assistants that the guy needs to bring gloves, and you need to hurry. You cannot make you wait for a purebred. When Zeke Dracy put gloves on his own hands, he immediately noticed the fact that they were quite weighty. He was uncomfortable in them, but there is nothing to do. He turned and went to the side, giving way to the new contender for the purge, who was already standing in line. It was obvious that Brother Abel came to the ceremony precisely because of Zik, and it was even clear to the fool that he was now making insidious plans for him. Abel's intentions were obvious to Zik, but there was nothing to do. In this situation, it would be necessary to accept the help of this insidious relative. But let the brother do not think that Zik remained a small and naive jerk. He also knows something and is not as stupid as the rest seems. The manager announced that the blessing ceremony is coming to an end, and all guests are invited to the holiday in honor of the manifestation of purebred. But Zik wanted to spit on this pathos party, where everyone would smile at each other in the face and hate everyone. So the guy went to look for a gym. He walked along the corridor and ended up in the secluded part of the estate, where no one had to disturb him. But as it turned out, he was watched. Within a second, he heard steps, and then the voice of his brother, who followed him on his heels. He asked why Zik left the party. Zik did not expect Abel to speak so quickly. It really surprised him, and he showed him with all his appearance that he was not craving for a conversation. Abel Dracy did not pay attention to it, or did the will that he did not turn. He held out Zika's hand for, and decided to congratulate his brother on the manifestation. Terrible dark pictures, people near the destroyed castle, many dead, strange sounds arose in Zika's memory. The guy hung for a minute and was not going to extend his hand to shake. Memories were floating in front of his eyes. Abel was even a little scared. But his brother continued to insist on a handshake. He smiled mockingly and poured banal congratulations towards the younger. An awkward moment came. Zik continued to stand like an idol, and Abel began to get out of itself this situation. He clearly began to be angry. The guy clearly knew one thing, that even now, in order to keep his face in front of the public, he still could not give a hand to this arrogant liar. Abel realized that he would not press his hand that he had shown to be purebred today, so he made a mug of disappointment, said that he was very glad to meet. He simply patted the guy on the shoulder, wished him success in further nightly activities, and defiantly headed for the exit from the hall. The older brother finally said that they would still see, and this is what Zik wanted the smallest. He did not at all want a second meeting with this person. It was noisy in the guests' hall. The guests relaxed slightly and conducted laid-back conversations. Basically, they discussed the manifestation of Zik Draker. But the guy decided not to listen to this nonsense and immediately went to his room. He wanted to quickly take off this stupid suit and be alone with his thoughts. Freed from excess clothes, he breathed in full chest and closed his eyes from the sensation of lightness. Now everything is behind. You can just relax in the silence. The thoughts about what is actually happening to him in no way came out, because all the purebred have the ability to suppress mana. This ability proves that a person is able to withstand dragons, a source of mana, but most mechanisms use Manu as fuel, which is why purebred gloves are worn. If he was really purebred, then as soon as Zik took off his glove, problems would have arisen. Therefore, he turned to a virtual tablet and opened the state window, because it does not look like what happened to him before. He did not suppress Manu, but reflected her. It turns out that the reflection is classified as a skill, and before the rite he was a healer of a rare rank. Now, its statute is considered the highest, and is called Unique Immortal. But as this is possible, if all graduates have an awakening accompanied by a blue aura, and it's red. Initially it glowed with bright red light, and then completely changed to the gold, and he could not give this a logical explanation. Further, the system generally said that the terminal lost information regarding classification by classes, and the terminal meant the statue itself. But as soon as the system introduced the necessary information, the standing bronze statue of the beginning of the stars to radiate red light, that's what exactly happened. It turns out that the bronze statue does not determine whether you have awakened or not. It determines the predisposition of the user and his class. The red color was considered very rare, and only the chosen ones were radiated, but the gold was generally unique, and it was owned by a limited number of people. Zik read that the bronze statue was the oldest relic, which was used even before Draker Tirakan, the founder of their family. Nowadays, the concepts of class do not exist at all. Therefore, it was used exclusively to check whether a person will awaken or not. Now it is clear that they incorrectly interpreted a red glow, which meant a rare class in the awakening of purebred, but no one knew this until today. Zik Dracy became a unique member of this family, and he received his abilities that did not use it before him. This is a dragon's vision and the power of the dragon. It was all good, but the guy expected that he would receive more information. But in fact, nothing had changed much. But the more he looked at the window of activation of his abilities, the more it seemed to him that the bronze statue could move and was approaching him directly. Zik even went to the balcony to make it easier to breathe. Maybe in the fresh air it would be more pleasant to perceive this reality. There was a message on the screen that Zik could request detailed information about what interests him at the moment. Of course, he wanted to take this opportunity and ask about every detail in this house because the story of the family was born here. His whole body was breaking with incomprehensible pain, and he could not understand its reason. If all the dragon skills are like that, then he could not use them often. The activation window issued a message that it was possible to use the ability to heal, but he was not going to activate it now. He was surprised by the information of statistics, as it turned out. All his class skills turned into passive, and all their levels increased by 1. He read that according to the system, his body is able to recover independently, and this applies to its passive skills. One would think that the healing process has long been overcome, but this is not at all what could constantly be neglected. The healing effect of his abilities is quite limited, which cannot be said about the healing factor, because it was endless, and it pleased. That is why Zik decided to conduct an experiment on his body and picked up a kitchen knife, then made an incision on his hand in the forearm area. Now he will understand how much his body can heal itself and regenerate the cells. If everything is correct, then the wound should drag on. Indeed, for some time, drops of blood in an amazingly disappeared way, and his hand did not give out a single sign of the cut. It turns out that this works, and even very good, and if everyone is studying at the academy for 5 years, then he will be able to graduate from the educational institution in just 2 years. The Dracy Academy was the most famous academy of knights on the continent. For admission here, anyone is ready to sacrifice everything and everything. The news of the new semester here began in early spring, and young people who dream of becoming knights came here from all over the continent. Students with a higher rating were no different from adults. All of them were perfectly trained and did not require additional classes. However, if you compare these young people with those who study in the cradle, they will still remain immigrants from noble families. Everyone here fought for their place under the sun and authority among teachers, as well as classmates, because the future depended on this. Among many different families who supported the Dreher family, there were 3 families that had the greatest influence, and absolutely everyone listened to them. A well-known Turan family on the whole continent was a model of power. It was she who belonged to a girl named Rhine, with whom Zik fought. The second family was considered in importance. Their difference was ancient wisdom, and if it was necessary to solve some issue, they turned to them. The magnificent family of Vardek supported the entire continent financially, because there was no one richer on this earth. Children from these 3 families, of course, enjoyed authority and their position in society. They, of course, were different from others. But Zika, this, by and large, was not worried. He was not going to be friends with anyone here, and even more so rubbing himself in confidence in anyone. Like all other students, he was strongly in a high-ranking hostel, which was called a Platinum Mansion. The guy went there. This building was little like a hostel. The room was equipped with a training room, a library, a gym, and other amenities. But all this is available only for students with the highest rating, and even from the cradle it was difficult to get here. Such a chance was given only to a purebred awakened. For them, there was an equipped whole floor known under the non-consolidated name Platin. Here the students at the entrance were met by maids. Further, the student fell into a common hall, where teachers, assistants, a servant, and another staff necessary for the educational process were waiting for him. Once on the floor he needed, Zik was a little dumbfounded because even for purebred awakening from elite families, it was too luxurious. The guy was informed that his personal assistant Deer was waiting for him in the room, where his tongue went immediately. Once in his room, away from the noise and people, the guy saw a beautiful velvet chest on the table. Deer said it, saying that this was a gift. Without thinking twice, the guy opened the chest and took out beautiful black gloves made of thin leather from there. He immediately put them on. Then in his voice decided that since he already had new gloves, it would be great to get a new sword. In these parts there are a lot of high-quality materials and skillful masters who make weapons exclusively for students of the academy. Deer, of course, suggested looking for a worthy master for the manufacture of swords from the best steel for a guy, but his tongue refused. He had one professional in mind, so he handed his assistant to his assistant to agree on a meeting. Deer had never heard about Master Gallion Halbert, but promised to contact this man. Further, Zik began to study his schedule. Classes were supposed to begin from the day, and this guy was very pleased. Given the fact that the platinum floor is completely isolated, it will have much more freedom to develop the dragon skills. They knocked on the door, and a maid appeared on the threshold. The woman said that Miss Reina Turun sent him an invitation to dinner. Zik did not expect this at all, and did not understand why the girl was dinner with him, but still accepted the invitation. Half an hour later, he was already heading to a small restaurant near the academy, thinking about pleasant gatherings with his former rival. But everything turned out to be much more banal. The Rhine Turun was not one, but in the presence of several people, and they were very aggressive. The tongue realized that the girl is the hostess of the floor, and the people in her family were quite peculiar. You need to be extremely careful. The guy came closer and settled in front of the girl, then thanked the Rhine for the invitation. He was very pleased. Without a ceremony for a long time, the girl took the menu and offered to start a bite to start, and Zik noticed that she uses the lower abdomen to control her aura. Vague guesses began to climb into the head of Draker. Is the Rhine really preparing to become a purple knight? But judging by how she fought, her level of ownership of the sword was stalled, and now she spends time on some dinners, instead of training. But there was nothing to do. I had to act according to the situation, because the guy knew that Reina Turun called him not just to eat. Therefore, after they finished with dessert, Zik Dracy decided to directly ask why he was called here. The girl said that her family was ready to provide Ziku Draker for universal support, because he seems to have a wrong idea of purebred awakened. Yes, such students have a lot of privileges at the academy, only the platinum floor is evidence that they are not ordinary people. But they do not receive any benefits from the point of view of their development, and centuries, old theoretical and practical knowledge are accumulated at the academy. For an effective increase in abilities, it is necessary to have a personal instructor. If he is not, then no matter what a student is provided, he will lag behind. This is why support is needed, because even Abel Dracy, who is a Black Knight, received support from his mother's family, a glorious family of Zimin. Although the head of the family, Turun, did not explain the reason, he said that Zik does not receive support from his mother's family. Therefore, Reina Turun asks once again whether Zik Dracy is ready to receive the necessary support during study from the family of Turun. Thinking a minute, the guy smiled mysteriously, thanked the girl for her care, but Turun politely refused to support the family. The Rhine did not understand and did not appreciate such behavior, because supporting her kind is a rather profitable decision for a guy. But Zik explained that this is not the point. He does not need anything beyond what he has rightfully, like the awakened purebred. He thanked the Rhine and headed for the exit, and in gratitude for dinner gave the girl one advice: not to be so good about people who surround her. He also said that there is too much strength in the sword of the Rhine of the Turun, and it should be used correctly, otherwise it will lose the resource. The largest force of the Rhine of Turun was the ability of mobility, and she arose thanks to the flexible body of the girl. Zik advised during the battle not to attack his opponents immediately in the forehead, but to use the power of flexibility and evasive from attacks. In this, the smoothness of movements should help her, and as Zik noted, she owns this ability very well. Since she is still a fragile girl, her blows should be accurate but very smooth, so she will always win. If Ray listened to his advice on the Turun, then in the next tournament he will definitely be a winner. He does not doubt it. In the end, he once again thanked for a delicious dinner and stepped back, referring to the emergency. The girl did not expect such behavior from this newly made hero. From evil, she even jumped up from the table and hit her fist on his surface. As he does not understand, the Turun family is the personification of power, and he rejects the help that she kindly offers. And the point is not at all that she pays attention to the environment, and not that she lost the tournament to him. She was simply obsessed with the idea of becoming a man who is really worthy to bear the glorious name of the family of Turun. And this guy was able to see what sometimes she herself tried not to notice, because in childhood she was often called a brilliant child, but no one gave such advice. For a minute, she thought that she would not want to be in the category of enemies of this mysterious and insightful guy named Zik Dracy. He fled as fast as possible, thus checking his skill of endless endurance. In his past life, this place seemed to him a real hell on earth. But now, having awakened, he realized that he had hit a very good paradise. Money and power over most of the continent are not all. He finally realized that there is nothing better than this sensation in the chest that he is experiencing now. The guy simply walked around the territory of the academy, enjoying silence and solitude, but noticed that they were watching him intently from afar. Zik stopped and decided to find out what was the matter. Who could not tolerate his nerves so much in the morning? Having looked closely, he saw Ares Ziminus walking towards him. The guy was not alone. He was accompanied by a whole delegation of students. His gait was harsh, and the appearance of the autumn is self-confident. This self-confident idiot imagined that due to the humiliation of Zik Draker, he would be able to increase his status among students. But now everything has changed. Ares came closer and asked why Zik ignored his invitation to yesterday's dinner. Is it possible that he did not receive a letter? Zamina's answer was slightly dumbfounded by his simplicity, because Zik replied that he had seen a letter on his table, but she did not bother to open it and read it. The subsequent words of the Draker generally brought the enemy out of balance. Zik said that he was not going to answer the letters of each counterclap. One of the accompanying Zimans came forward and recalled that before Zik is one of the representatives of the most influential family on the continent, so it is worth being a little more firmly. But Zik did not particularly react to this. On the contrary, the stranger calmly asked who he was and what he was doing here. To himself, the guy thought that everyone who enters the cradle from the cradle was nothing, so he did not stand on ceremony. He simply turned around, said that if a guy wants to show off his master, then let him also do not forget who he is talking to now. Zik Drarik is far from the last person at the Academy of Knights, so such as this thunder, it is worth always knowing his place and not particularly show off. But then the stranger decided to show what he was capable of, and abruptly released his aura, so much so that Zik even staggered. And the unfamiliar guy shouted after him that his name is Durban Roosevelt, and here everyone calls him a powerful Durban. Ziku should remember it. Dracy grinned. Why does the cadet, who is not even a knight, have a nickname? And why does he defend Ares of Zimin? Zik abruptly ran to Grommel and decided to teach him a pretty lesson in politeness, because no one here still allowed such rudeness towards him. After a few minutes, a large and powerful Durban Roosevelt was lying on the ground, and blood flowed from his nose. Then Zik Dracy turned to the young Ares, who decided not to stir his hands in battle, and invited him to quickly decide on the choice. The guy recalled that sending huge guys to him with good physical preparation to humiliate is a very bad idea. Ares did not climb into his pocket for a word, so he promised with witnesses that he would still have a chance to take revenge on the Draker, and this chance would come soon. The conflict was exhausted, and Zik Dracy went to the court of the Knights Academy, but something strange was happening there. There were many people on the street. The Dracy Academy was divided into two classes. In ordinary classes, those who have no talent at all. Such a cadet had to make considerable efforts to at least achieve something, so they trained from early morning to late at night. But Zik Dracy belonged to the second grade, where the elite herself studied, who chose educational subjects for herself, all except the basic ones. Well, for some reason, Dracy did not at all catch the difference between these two classes, and there was a strict discipline and demanding teachers. The administrator entered the lecture hall and said that for freshmen of a special class, some completely exceptional lecturer will give a lecture today. The guys even perked up a little. Everyone was wondering who their lecturer would turn out to be, probably some kind of big bump. The door swung open and Howard Dracy himself, the owner and part-time director of this academy, entered the audience. The man was advanced, but he looked very well, groomed and pleasant. He greeted the students and began to give the first lecture. Everyone knew this man perfectly. He was the hero of war and the genius of tactical battles. But Zik Dracy was not happy with the guest, because he considered this person a real traitor. And it was precisely because of him that the guy had to abandon the academy. He lost the only remaining place to which he could belong, so he had to wander around the Duchy of Troy. But this did not last long, because in the end, Zika Draker was caught, and then they sold the Southern Cartel for a good price. Therefore, Zik with anger looked at the elderly professor and mentally promised himself that he would definitely take revenge on this person for all his troubles. After the lecture, the administrator said that the group began to basic classes, so everyone took their swords and went to the arena. For a special class of elite representatives, a special covered arena was built so that it was comfortable for students to deal with. Ziku Draker was incredibly boring, because who would have thought that the special class would have to study the art of killing dragons? In his past life, just because of the inability to use the aura, he spent 2 years to study what an ordinary person has 3 months. He really dreamed that this time it was much easier, because he simply does not survive the second episode in his life. Then the teacher came out to them and introduced himself. His name was Andre Dracy, and in the next months he will teach the group of the art of murder of dragons. A slight noise ran among young people. Everyone began to whisper because the appearance of the teacher, and they really impressed them. Despite the fact that he is not a purebred awakened, Andre Draker early graduated from the academy with honors and was a real genius that are found once a century. Teachers of this class were at a completely different level, and Andre was also known for his adamant character. Students. They immediately felt it because the man shouted to shut up since he begins his lesson. Andre Dracy decided to ceremony with the students, so he asked young people to immediately expose his swords. For their dryer hesitated a little. He did not manage to spect a sword with spectacularly, and the teacher drew attention to it. Well, in the next minute, the guy repeated the attempt and demonstrated all his skills in possession of the sword. It turned out quite spectacular. Further, the tongue stopped. A prisoner turned to the teacher and handed him his educational sword. Andre Draker seemed to be slightly surprised, because he did not expect such dexterity from an ordinary student, albeit proper to the elite class. Not to mention the word, the teacher showed his hand to the arena, pointing to the Ziku to follow him. The guy, of course, went out, and then he said that he was sure that he could defeat the teacher with this sword. Andre wondered if this student really has enough skills to win in the duel of an experienced warrior. The teacher decided to teach a young impudent and proposed a training competition, to which Zik agreed with confidence. The conditions were simple. If Zik could at least touch the teacher's body with his blade, he immediately frees from classes. But Andre warned the guy that the battle would be heavy and cruel, so the student should be constantly on the alert. The proposal was more than attractive. Besides, Zik was 100% sure that he would be able to defeat the teacher. Andre, in turn, warned Cadet that he was not going to use his aura against him so that the battle was honest. Zik understood that these statements were quite loud, and he could well defeat Andre. But given that Abel was watching him, he decided not to attract excess attention. He thought that the battle would be very short and light enough, because he just needed to hurt the teacher's body. And that's all. They decided not to pull with the competition, and two guys immediately rushed to the attack on each other, in order to finish this stupid dispute as soon as possible. Andre suddenly thought that the Blue Knight, which he was, easily taught the lesson to this small impudent, because he was not in the first. To the surprise of the rivals, as well as all the spectators, the battle was very hot. No one wanted to give in, showing with his actions that he was configured to win. They began to whisper in the stands, and the audience divided into two camps. Some were branded for Andre, and rejoiced that in half an hour, Zik could not injure the teacher. Andre Dracy was already a little tired, because he thought that he would not cost anything to defeat this boy in just a few minutes. This situation began to gradually get him out of his temper. He promised not to let his aura, and now he understands that he could lose to a simple cadet. And already in itself, the existence of purebred and their manifestation seemed to the teacher a rather unfair phenomenon of this world. The method of cultivating the aura of Drikers is known for its feature. They activate it during everyday activity, without even noticing it. Roughly speaking, Andre now just stopped breathing. Non-traditional ownership of the sword even more reduced his endurance. But it was not entirely correct to lose to the opponent in this way, so Zik thought for a second and lost his balance, which led to the consequences. There was nothing to do. The guy will have to lead the teacher out of balance and force him to show his aura. He thought that it was useless to make any attacks that your opponent can easily cope with. This is an extra waste of energy. Therefore, Zik Dracy decided to come up with something that would make his opponent unconsciously use the liberation of his aura. For this, the image of an extreme situation is very suitable, and Zik will now suit its enemy. You need to see what will come of it. Zik Dracy decided to attack behind. For this, he jumped high enough and decided to strike with a sword from the enemy's back. This should shock him. It was the art of swift steps that the opponent owned, and Zik guessed about it in the battlefield, so he decided to use his knowledge. This is exactly what the guy needed, because the teacher became furious and unconsciously began to release his aura to stop this boy. And Ziku Draker only had to wait. He immediately realized that the teacher's tactics changed sharply, so the guy acts correctly. In the stands, those who were ill for Andre even got up from their seats, because their teacher began to control the situation and must win. Zik Dracy quietly watched the audience and the behavior of the teacher himself, and what he saw could not but rejoice, but it was really difficult. Now it was possible to chop off, lose consciousness, and pretend to be all together for a more colorful effect, and Perrin fell to the ground. Andre calmly looked at the guy who flew a couple of meters and painfully fell on concrete. He was not a miserable Zik. But suddenly the teacher shouted to the whole training room that a cadet named Zik Dracy could not attend his classes since today. Further, the teacher asked if there were still those who still wanted to receive official dismissal from his classes, fighting with him in battle. He slowly looked around all those present, but everyone was silent. Dropping his heads on the floor, who wanted to do not find. Everyone was afraid. Half an hour after the battle, Zik Dracy was lying on a hospital bed in the local first aid post of the Knights Academy and enjoyed his ingenuity. Yes, he could not touch Andre's body with his sword, but this is not important now. In this situation, it is important that he made the teacher use his aura. As a result, the teachers had to punish that he had arranged a competition with the cadet, and Zik had enough time for rest and outputty. But it is worth noting that Andre Draker's last attack was an elementary technique in the art of murdering dragons, but his strength was incredible. He can still defeat the Blue Knight, given his boundless endurance and the ability to complete the healing of his body. Suddenly, it is not known where a strange stranger appeared in the room, and this man was very similar to an ordinary tramp, besides drunk. The man looked at him for a long time, and then suddenly asked Zika if he was the youngest son of Arthur Draker, and again reached for a bottle with a drink. He further continued to methodically drink, and say that the guy had the same eyes as this bastard of Arthur. It turned out that the stranger was well aware of the battle between Zik and his teacher, and now commented on the current situation. The man reminded the Dryker that during the fight he received a fairly serious blow, but it turned out that his wound in some wonderful way instantly disappeared. He further recalled that there was still no person at the academy who would have such skills. And Zik continued to play the comedy, and pretended that he did not understand what the stranger was talking about. And then it came to Zika, this man who has made his way to him in the hospital ward as a hired killer, and perhaps will now come the last minutes of his life. He sharply grabbed the sheet and tried to throw her on the killer's face in order to win at least a few seconds of time. He had not yet come up with another plan. One thing was clear. If now Zik does not kill this maniac, then everything can end, without even starting, and tomorrow all the cadets will gather his funeral. The man easily dodged the blow and threw off the sheet from the eyes. He said that Zika's skills are very like a professional mercenary. Then he laughed, and the guy went frost on his skin, but who he was, this stranger, and the most important thing, who sent him to Ziku. The battle began, very active and terrible. It was clear that this person possesses weapons quite well. But Zik also did not give the back. He prepared to attack the stranger and took a profitable position. He needed to find out who it was. Interestingly, this person knows at least something about Zika Draker's past life. It was very important for a guy. The stranger Sarpidna smiled and said that the guy looks more like a good mercenary than a noble knight. There was a huge abyss between their abilities, so large that if the stranger wanted to, then Zika would easily kill. For a minute, the guy even thought that this person could be stronger than the Red Knight. But who sent him here? Until the acquaintance turned away, Zik decided to take a few steps back to just a little time, but the killer quickly overtook him. And then suddenly for Zik and his mysterious visitor in the doorway of the chamber, Andre Dracy appeared. In a stranger, the teacher recognized the well-known caretaker of the academic garden, Mr. Dexter. The gardener strained and asked Andre how he found out that he would appear in the ward to the young cadet. The teacher replied that he had seen him among the audience in the stands. Then he turned to Ziku and ordered the guy to return to his studies. In the end, Dexter shouted to the young cadet so that he would visit the western greenhouse of the academy. He will teach him something useful. The guy stood in the middle of the chamber and was silent. In one day, so many things happened that he was completely confused. Who is his friend and who is the enemy? Zik thanked Dexter for the invitation, but was forced to politely refuse. He did not want to meet anymore. The guy did not believe a single word of Andre. This stranger cannot be an ordinary caretaker of the garden and take care of fragile plants. A real killer. If he has a rank that allows a man to call the current chapter simply by name, then he is definitely not a simple gardener. Probably he is the very person who has only one student in his whole life. It is he who is Duke Draker. It was one of those very black knights that are alone capable of opposing the whole kingdom. About this man, with good luck, that he disappeared a long time ago, having said nothing to anyone, but who would have thought that he had been hiding at the academy all this time? Perhaps Teacher Andre recovered precisely because of him. Perhaps he knew that Duke was here. There are rumors that Duke received the status of a black knight only because he really liked the black color. Now this person is showing great interest in Ziku Draker, but getting light training due to simple interest, this is exactly what he needs. If Zik is going to learn something at this academy, then he must at least find out a secret trick and turn the interest in perseverance. The theory of magic at the Academy of Knights was taught by Professor Fanon. He was a very interesting and intelligent person. But at the lectures of this man, for some reason, everyone really wanted to sleep, because only a few watched a man of thoughts of a man. Professor Fanon was so fond of work that he did not even notice that only a few were listening to his lecture. Everyone else was just sleeping. But Zik carefully listened to the teacher, and even asked questions when he did not understand something from what the lecturer said. Fanon was very happy when he was asked questions, because this is evidence of value that students were listening carefully to him. Thus, most days of study at the Knights Academy took place monotonously and in the same type, but Zik tried not to complain about anything. Others complained, especially about the fact that at the Knights Academy, cadets should teach magic. One day after completing the lecture, Professor Fanon asked the guy to linger for several minutes in the audience. He thanked Zika Draker for listening carefully, and if he was interested in something else, then the Fanon will be happy to help. Zik thought that the professor was an unusual magician. He did not even know that Fanon was a graduate of the Delphus Magic University, the country magic was born. Therefore, the guy thought that there would be nothing wrong if he ties friendship with a professor of magic. He could teach him a lot. A few days later, walking around the courtyard of the academy, the guy noticed a familiar figure on a bench and decided to come up. Of course, it was the gardener of the Dexter Academy, who had long been waiting for Zika and impressively spread out on the bench. Not particularly ceremony. The man immediately asked the guy why he ignored the invitation and did not come to him in the greenhouse. This guy could not understand what Dexter had in mind when he said that he would teach him something useful, but the guy repeated once again that he was not interested. He now has a lot of individual tasks, so you should not wait for him. But then the gardener of the academy raised his hand, and Zick saw that a bright blue color was pouring out of it. Now it was already interesting. When the guy came to his senses, he realized that he had lost consciousness from Dexter's blow, and now he is in a greenhouse. It turns out that the gardener, without waiting for his visit, decided to take him to his greenhouse in such a strange way. He quickly found Dexter and asked for what purpose the man beat him and abducted him. They will look for him. Dexter calmly replied that this was his simple plan, because in a different way the guy would not have come to him. Here I was sure that now it was not the time to make friendship or any other relations with this strange person, so he tried to escape. But after a second, some magical force nailed the guy to the ground, and Dexter immediately turned out to be behind him. The man smiled wryly and said that the guy would not be able to run away, even if he was not trying in vain. The gardener once again asked how all the wounds and miserable Zika heal in such a lightning manner. But the guy decided to go to the bank. He said that if a man is so interested in, then let him make him answer. But then the most interesting began. Zick expected that the man would hit him or something else like that, but the gardener simply disappeared. A minute later, the guy felt some strange energy near him. He immediately realized that Dexter was near him. Zick pulled out his sword and at random began to wave it, in the hope that in this way it will fall into the gardener and injure it. But it wasn't there. Zick heard steps, and then the silhouette of Dexter, who gradually moved away. He ran away. In the end, the gardener shouted that if Zick could at least touch him, he would fulfill one desire of the guy. Dexter could only be surprised at the endurance of this boy. 3 hours had already passed, and Zick continued to look for him. The guy did not stop even in front of a high stone wall and decided to climb up. You need to check where the gardener hid. Dexter watched the guy and noted for himself that the dryer would stop at nothing. His endurance and wounds are recovering simply instantly. This baby will still show himself, and it will happen pretty soon, and maybe Dexter will help him in this. The man understood that, if necessary, the guy activates the skills of a healing factor and endless endurance. The early language Dracy knew about the power of the dragon, but this skill seemed quite dangerous to him, so he had not used it before. But now is the time to reconsider your views and take this opportunity against the Black Knight, who is definitely Dexter. Zick decided that by all means he would take this strange man to the pure water, which means the game continues. Then the guy heard the voice of the gardener. The man mocked him and asked Zika to show himself the present. From confusion and hopelessness, the young man pulled out his sword and began to wave it from side to side, showing that he was seriously configured. The gardener noticed that the guy repeats the same technique. Maybe he is fast, but in comparison with the teacher André or Reina Turun, he still seems to be anyone. However, this anger and fearlessness in his eyes liked the man. The perseverance of this boy could only be envied. Zick decided to go to extreme measures and activate the power of the dragon, so he will be able to use a little of his aura, and this should give results. But for some reason, nothing came of the guy. All Dexter attacks were very quickly and successfully repulsed. But at one point, everything fell into place. The aura began to act, and Zick desperately went on the attack, blinding the enemy with his energy. He deprived the appearance of the Black Knight. Well, he decided to show all his strength, so he warned the guy that it would be even more complicated further. But Zeke was already ready for this, because a minute ago he decided to activate the dragon's vision skill. He will definitely help him. At one point, he almost overtook a strange gardener, but it turned out that the man simply disappeared before his eyes. Only traces of shoes on the sand remained from the Black Knight, and they quickly disappeared from the blow of the wind. He disappeared again. That is why Duke Draker was called a Black Knight or a Storm Knight, because a man could cause terrible gusts of wind with a simple jerk. A few seconds later, the gardener reappeared and began to attack the guy, but he activated all his abilities and successfully fought back. After some time, due to the excessive use of skills, the fatigue of the Zik exceeded the permissible limit. The system forcibly turned off all the skills used, and the guy was only distinguished by the silhouette of a gardener who was moving away. A little later, the guy came up with the realization that he had just fought with the strongest knight of this continent. Zick Dracy absolutely did not remember how he ended up in his dormitory room for an elite class. The guy slowly climbed onto the bed and looked around. Apparently the knight personally brought him here and put him in bed. At the moment, the guy did everything he could, but this was not enough. He tried to weaken the vigilance of the knight, repeating the same attack from time to time. At the decisive moment, with the help of the power of the dragon and the dragon's vision, wanted to strike Duke, but alas, he did not have enough strength. Now Zick was aware that he really lost consciousness due to the excessive use of the dragon skills. But on the other hand, he was able to see the secret reception of the Black Knight. He used meaningless, incredibly fast movements, thanks to an extremely trained body. It was precisely this secret technique that allowed Andre, with weak endurance, to rise to the level of the Red Knight. Ziku became a pity that he missed the opportunity to study the secret technique, but it was worth it. The power of the dragon exerts such a huge pressure that it makes even the Black Knight to hesitate. Most cadets would have surrendered immediately as soon as they were faced with this skill. The virtual tablet picked remind you of unread messages. It was indicated that Zika Draker's soul divorced, thanks to the manifestation of willpower, and he also received karma points. Then the guy read that to unlock his system, and its renewal, 45 points need. At the moment, the guy had only 40 of them. Then he got acquainted with the line of the menu where it was possible to choose the desired inventory. This inventory could be constantly increased. That is, the guy could activate skills, just thinking about them. So he began to visualize a sword that he would need. Claymore disappeared and occupied 2 out of 28 cells that were available in the inventory. This was precisely what was meant in the message about the space occupied by the subject. At the beginning, Zik thought that it would be something like a subspace, but everything turned out to be much better. Of course, this artifact was expensive, but finding something like that for its storage was completely difficult. It is interesting what will happen when it reaches a higher rank. If the value of these points is so high, then it will not be able to thoughtlessly scatter them. Well, apparently the guy will have to change his plans, which already changed, because they knocked on the door, and Deer appeared on the threshold. The guy did not want to see anyone, so he sadly asked why the assistant disturbed his peace. The man, without saying a word, handed the guy a note. She was from a stranger, but he said that Zik would understand if the Deer said the word gardener. Without hesitation for a long time, Zik grabbed a note from the assistant and turned it around. There Dexter reported, "The guy could come when he wants to fight again." The young man immediately remembered that the gardener called their duel a draw, so he wants to meet again. The guy smiled angrily. Fate itself will bother him to find out more information about the techniques of the Black Prince. Deer also informed the guy that he found a blacksmith that Zik was talking about, but the fact is that this master refuses to meet with Draker. The guy did not like this at all, because as an ordinary master can refuse the heir to one of the oldest and most influential births. The assistant sadly said that this blacksmith of weapons, unfortunately, is no longer engaged in the manufacture of balls. Already on the next morning, Zik Dracy stood in front of the house of the Master of Swords. He decided to check why this man refused him. The workshop had a name. On the wall hung the sign Panpira's Breath, which seemed to the guy too loud for such a place. Without thinking for a long time, the young man opened the door and asked if there was anyone alive in this house, because there was a real chaos. Master Graham was sitting at the table. Now he was in a deplorable state, but earlier he created a sword that had the ability that the language needed most, the opportunity to change the air for aura. The greatest blacksmith on the continent, who had forged this sword, now drank unequilled and did not touch work for a long time. Master Graham languidly looked at Zika Draker and said that he would clean because the children have no place here. Although he was a rather picky person, he never reached such a terrible state. But what happened to him? Without hesitation for a long time, Zik Draer is a bucket of cold water and doused the man from head to toe it. He did not even manage to shout anything. Only then did Dracy smiled sweetly and finally decided to say hello to the master and go directly to the matter. When the master came to his senses a little, the guy asked why he rejected his offer and make a powerful sword. The man examined the guy for a long time until he saw his gloves with the coat of arms of the Dracy family, and this horrified him. He immediately fell to his knees for forgiveness for the fact that the young master saw him in his house in such a shameful state. Now he does not take orders because he does not want to create what someone else came up with, but what he himself wants, he is not able to do. Graham probably did not want to share his problems and never talked about what way of life he led, because Zik knew him from a past life. Now the master considered himself useless, but the guy could not wait 10 years until he came to his senses and became the greatest master. Graham still asked for forgiveness. I don't know why, and Zik ordered him to show a couple of another work. The master had to spend the guy in the backyard and reluctantly demonstrate all the results of his activities. The whole yard looked like an arms field. There, stood in the ground, there were dozens of swords, and this sight was delightful. Zik passed between the swords, as in the museum, considering each unique exhibit. The man warned the guy to be careful because at least swords are not perfect, but still quite sharp. These were far from failed balls. In quality, they did not differ from those who, having become the best master on the continent. Ziku had to activate his ability of the dragon's vision, so he was able to better see the sword that he liked. For a long time, considering the weapon, the guy concluded that Graham has some fried problems, and they need to be eliminated immediately. The man opened his eyes wide in surprise where this guy knows that his roasting broke. Draker understood that this master had his own special style of work. for which he uses several types of metal to create a lighter and sophisticated material. But as for the strength of the products, here Graham still needs to experiment and create your best creation. This is because impurities that are in metals were not properly removed during the pumping process. The master continued to be surprised because Dracy not only recognized his swimming method, but also found the main drawback and its reason. Graham was silent for a while, and then he said quietly that he would like to ask for something to ask the young master. He nodded in agreement. The master invited the guy to his office, rummaged for a long time in the desktop, and then took out strange drawings from there and let the guy look. Zick Draker asked Graham to completely turn the drawing so that he could understand what was depicted there. It turned out that this is the secret of Graham, which he will reveal many years later. In the drawing was a drawing of a magic brazier. It was a drawing of a magic brazier, the temperature in which was maintained with the help of magic, and this was the secret of the master. Graham knew that his work would certainly interest the guy, because with this invention, his swimming method would become impeccable. Ziku Dracy was tired of interesting why. Having all the drawings, Graham has not yet implemented his project. But the master sighed heavily and said that still needed the scheme of the mana energy law, but the commission of the magic tower is very large. He does not have that kind of money. The guy thought to accumulate the right amount. The master would go to this for at least 10 years, and this is a real absurdity. The language even thought about the fact that such a talented master as Graham must help, both financially and morally. But the master was ahead of him and said that if the dryer helps him with the roasting, he will fulfill any instructions of the guy. At this moment, Zick thought that even for him, a purebred knight from a powerful family, it would be difficult to get support in the amount of 10,000 gold. But he could not abandon the shining sword of the Master Graham, so we need to help solve problems with the law of mana energy. Having thought a little more and not saying anything about his thoughts, Zick loudly replied that he agreed to such a deal. Then he informed the master that he needed to consult with one very famous magician. When he finds out something, he will inform Graham. In the end, the guy asked the master from this day to pull himself together and stop drinking alcohol by barrels. Graham himself did not know that he was so sentimental. He burst into tears with happiness and thanked 1,000 times. The young knight jumped into the carriage, throwing the master in the end that in the near future he would contact him again. The next day, Zick decided to visit Professor Phenomena and headed for the research building of the Dracy Academy. The guy knew very well that Phenon specializes in the development of mana energy laws, so he decided to contact him. The professor's research laboratory was in some dark alley. Entering, the guy there heard a strange noise. Then Zick saw a cadet standing on his knees, who was flooded with people, and apologized to Sir Leon Conrad. Leon hit the guy again with his foot and began to humiliate him with the most terrible words, feeling his complete superiority. The victim no longer even resisted. The guy bent a Kalachik and tried to somehow protect his face with his hands. Zick, without hesitation for a long time, jumped in 2 jumps to the group of offenders and decided to quickly restore order and restore justice. Leon did not notice Draker, so he called the guy with the same insignificance as Zick himself, promised that he would destroy both the Draker and him. Previously unprecedented golden glow, the awakening of the purebred which surpassed the rest, all this still tormented this boor. And now Leon Conrad was all his anger and resentment on some helpless cadet from the lower class, feeling his superiority over the victim. He lost Ziku Draker due to the fact that he chose the technique of a sudden attack that Lion could not expect. But the thought that the one whom he considered real garbage turned out to be a purebred awakened from a great kind. Suddenly, behind him, Leon Conrad heard a familiar voice who warned that he had 3 seconds in order to remove his hands from a poor guy. None of those present expected to see Zika Draker, who stood opposite and watched this shameless picture. Leon Conrad directly became furious, noticing his most sworn enemy. Zick has become too arrogant since he woke up. But the dryer was very serious. There were absolutely no emotions on his face. He just looked at Leon and ordered him to kneel. Although he was brave, but in a steel voice from Dick Draker, he smelled a direct danger. He probably slightly went too far. But it was impossible to disgrace further. So Leon Conrad tried his best to preserve his face and reputation, both to friends and before Zick. Just a couple of months ago, this arrogant small crawled at his feet and prayed to mercy. But now Leon himself could be in his place. Having clenched all his composure into a fist, Leon shouted that Zick Dracy had no right to tell him how to behave at the academy, otherwise he could regret it. Further, Leon Conrad decided to attract friends to his defense and ordered his brothers to beat the guy properly. Zick Dracy foresaw this situation, so he immediately warned his opponent's friends so that they would not regret their decision later. The first to defend Leon was his best friend, who shouted that after a couple of minutes, only a wet spot would remain from Zick. But not even a minute has passed, since this daredevil was already lying on the ground and asking for forgiveness from Draker for his behavior. The rest decided that it makes no sense to fight Zim alone, so they began to attack him 2 or 3. A rather extensive fight ensued, and it was not clear from the outside it leads in it, and who would be beaten to half to death. Screams and strange noise scattered throughout the courtyard of the academy. Some of those present already asked for mercy. Someone tried to quickly escape. The cunning Leon Conrad miraculously got out of the fight and decided to observe everything from the side. He was really scared for his life for the first time. Scattering all friends around, Zik still looked at his enemy and began to slowly go to him. They looked into each other's eyes, realizing that the conflict between them was not over yet. They should continue. Leon, because of fear, revealed his sword and prepared to fight with Zik Draker using cold weapons. Dreher reminded the enemy that it was forbidden to get balls outside the training room, so their duel would end with the death of one of the participants. The battered Liam Stone raised his head and said that he agreed to be a witness to their battle. All the responsibility will lie down on the loser. Well then, Leon Conrad knelt down and pulled Liam also. They strictly began to apologize to the guy for his behavior. Zik involuntarily remembered how a year ago he himself suffered terrible beatings and humiliation from these people, and each time asked for mercy from them. But no one listened to him. It was at these minutes that he felt real anger. He could now avenge and kill both of these fools, but of course Zik did not. He waved his sword and at one point in Leon Conrad's ear, saying that for the first time such a punishment for this abnormal will be enough. Further, Zik Dreher warned that if this backwaters would meet him in the way again, then he would definitely remain without a head. The guy turned around and decided to leave the place of bloody skirmishes. He actually headed for the Professor Fan. But he was stopped by a guy who was beaten by Leon's gang. He asked why Zik decided to help him. Dracy replied that he was bothering on this topic because he helped himself more than an unfamiliar cadet. Probably, his new sword, which he took from the master of Graham, should have done this weapon to the guy. Should definitely defend the weak. A few minutes later, Zik Draker safely reached the research laboratory of Professor Fannin and launched the drawings of the Master Graham in front of him. The man carefully examined all the notes and drawings and was extremely surprised by the abilities of the blacksmith. He turned out to be a real genius. The design at first glance was quite simple, but the problem was in the nucleus responsible for the output power. The core was the heart of this machine, but, as it turned out, the scheme had extremely complex restrictions. The professor explained that the core can be small, but it should be incredibly powerful, and you also need to come up with a way to regulate the output. Fanon offered to adjust the drawing a little, but this work will take him about 10 years and maybe all 15. But there is another option, and you can resort to an alternative. But the object that is necessary for this is a stone of mana of high density. Zik jumped in surprise. Is it not an ancient artifact that cannot be created using modern technologies? That is, an ancient rare relic. Professor Fannin was sad, because it is much more difficult to find other artifacts than getting a mana stone that is necessary for existing drawings. Zik also clearly sad. They can be expelled from here if they find out that the guy does not know how to use the aura, so he cannot wait for 10 or 15 years. But 3,000 gold coins to acquire everything necessary, he also cannot get it, and apparently, he will have to abandon Graham's radiant sword. Everyone thinks that he uses the aura because of what happened during the Rite of Blessing, but it was just a reaction of the statue caused by ether and healing. Ether is a force that is difficult for a person to control, and Zik cannot use any skill of owning a sword for which an aura needs, with the exception of the skill of the spirit of the soul. Professor Fanning continued to be surprised. He admitted that the creator of this drawing is an amazingly intelligent person. Even taking into account the complex core, the design is quite effective, because it is very difficult to find this even among the relics of the Golden Age. And the professor's words suddenly prompted Zika to one thought. He asked to take care of the drawings of Graham, and he himself had to leave for a while. Fanon did not understand the actions of the young man, as he did not understand his explanation. Why does he go somewhere at all? But Zik Dracy only smiled mysteriously and said that in a very near future he will get a stone of mana of the highest density. At the beginning of the Golden Age, a liberation war was going on for a long time, during which people tried to escape from the power of the dragons. This long-term battle ended in the victory of the Terrakan Draker over the evil dragon Bogamut, so the people gained a centenary of the world. Then the ancient relics that were discovered in the dragon's den were the remnants of the king of the hero, and among them was a high-density stone that could satisfy the needs of the whole village. Now all the evidence of those times were in the central library of the Academy of Dracy, where Zik went. This building was rarely used, but it was supported since it was believed that it was founded by a cockroach dryer, and recently countless relics of the Golden Age have been found here. The news about this spread throughout the continent, but it was in the last life of Zika Draker, and until this moment, it was necessary to wait 10 years. The entrance to the secret sector of the library could be sought all day, and how to not find it anyway because it was well disguised. All that was now needed. Ziku Draker is very careful, so the guy decided to activate the dragon's vision skill. Going through various departments of the library, he hit the huge hall, where the floor was expelled by ancient skillful ceramic tiles. He began to tap the slabs in order to recognize by a deaf sound where the space is under the tile, and of course found it. This lesson did not take the guy in 10 minutes. The disguised entrance to the mysterious department of the library was found. Then the matter will go faster. To push the heavy stove, I had to use the souls of the spirit, because without magical support, the guy himself would not have managed. After a few minutes, Zik Draer cautiously made his way to the most mysterious section of the Draer Academy library. Only a few dozen people visited the entire history. But in spite of everything, all ancient books were neatly placed on the shelves, and absolute order reigned in the room. In the information messenger, they did not write that the entrance to the secret library would be so deep. Ziku even had to light a torch. Having passed a little more, the guy heard strange steps. He lurked behind the column and began to watch carefully. It will pass for at least 10 years, then people will discover and dig up the ruins of this library. Interestingly, someone could find this place earlier than Draker. After standing a little more, the guy went to the middle of the corridor and froze with fear and surprise. There were 2 skeletons near the wall, which held different tools in his hands. Whether the skeletons were also lying on shovels and picks, and this meant that those who dug up ruins died here. If so, then you need to activate the skill of a critical blow, so that, if necessary, to be prepared for battle with magical creatures. The guy waved his sword several times. Shovels, picks, and crowbars flew to the sides. Several skeletons fell to the floor with a terrible roar. It's strange because Zik invented for himself that these skeletons should now, but to live and attack him from all sides. But this did not happen, because to have more information, Zik Dracy called a virtual tablet. It turned out that he received several additional points for the destruction of 2 skeletons, apparently were monsters. The guy thought that, hunting for Mana Stone, he completely forgot that it was vital for him to earn more points. Therefore, without thinking for a long time, the guy ran further along the corridor, looked for new skeletons, and diligently broke them into pieces. As a result, Ziku Draker managed to destroy as many as 20 skeletons. For each of them, he received 1 point of karma. After that, the guy had the opportunity to activate the new dragon skills. For this, it was necessary to pay 50 points. Further, Zik Dracy decided to activate the mini-card function in order to better navigate in the mysterious space. But for some reason, this card seemed magical to the guy, because she could independently reform from 2D and 3D format. Zik did not expect at all that he was deep underground. He would find such progressive technologies as a 3D card. It was simply amazing, and the guy was certainly very happy about this. Now he can see the exact location of the Mana Stone in this place. Then he gave a request to make the map the route to the place where the Mana Stone was located. This place turned out to be a pantry, so the guy began to lay the fastest route to the object of his search. In less than a minute, the virtual card gave the guy the result and indicated the shortest route to his goal. Zik Dracy did not wander around the corridors for long, and after half an hour he stood in front of the huge door, behind which was the pantry. The guy perfectly understood that such a door just doesn't open. It makes no sense to knock either. You need to figure out how to get inside. He remembered that he had previously read about a magic security spell, which had the ability to open any doors in front of the companion. The reason why the magic tower and the supreme mage of the Nirvana were attracted was to be precisely in this door. And now the guy understood that if not for his unique gloves, then from contact with this magic door, he could lose his hand. Thinking a little more, he realized that he himself could not cope, and asked the system to open this door for him. He did this on the joke, but it turned out that the system hears him well and could follow all the orders of Draker. Then the guy asked the question that was tormented. He asked why the system forced him to regress him, but he did not receive an answer to this question. Then he asked the virtual tablet how the administration system works, but the answer also did not follow. The young man realized that this thing would not answer him any question regarding his personal life and regression. Therefore, he asked his virtual tablet simply to open this mysterious door so that he could get inside. Some locks clicked, the door opened, and the system said that the dragon burial room, called the pantry, openly. Zik Dracy took a few steps inside and froze in surprise. There were high racks around, and they placed different sizes of chests. The guy went to one of them and easily lifted the lid. It turned out to be a chest to the top was packed with valuable relics and treasures. There were countless good ones here, but it would be good to find at least one ancient relic. This Ziku would be quite enough. Then Zik opened another chest, and a satisfied smile appeared on the guy's face. It seems he was in the right place. In the chest there were neatly located stones of mana of the highest density. It was their Zik. In half an hour, he filled a whole backpack with stones of mana and other different relics. Would he really have to return here until he finishes the academy? But for some reason, the guy did not leave some strange feeling, as if someone was spying on him, and the gloves in his hands became red. Then some strange energy began to circle around the Dryker and lift heavy chests with gold into the air. The guy had to ask the system what this is, the mysterious place in which he is now. The system replied that the cadet Dracy is currently in the very center of the house of the Dragon Killer. Previously, in information sources, he did not read information about a strange abandoned room, which is completely littered with coffins, which is generally going on here. Again, I had to use a virtual mini-card in order to more specifically determine their whereabouts and think about how to proceed. Zeke Dracy knew so much. He was really not far from the place where he was before, but there were no direct passage to the house of the Dragon's Killers. If so, then it can be a hidden area that no one just found before, and this cannot be left just like that. In front of him, the guy saw huge armor of the ancient knight. It seemed that someone was looking after them very well. The system told Ziku that he found exclusive equipment of the Dragon Killer, but he needs to be very careful with him. Zik began to consider everything in very detail. He thought that armor should differ from those who put on the Knights of the Golden Age. Then the guy turned the armor to carefully examine his back. There was a strange hole near the neck, and of course Zik put a mana stone there. The system said that Drerika installed the mana battery in the exclusive equipment of the Dragon Killer, and now it will be activated. Then it became more interesting and interesting. The guy had a gambling smile on his face. Now he is returning to the past. After a few seconds, Zik saw the activation of Mana Stone in action, because the armor began to move. The guy did not expect such a turn of events at all. He was even a little scared. Here there is no one to help him. From fright, he even fell to the ground, actually. The system could and warn about the consequences so that it prepared. That is, the source of energy for these ancient armor was precisely a stone of mana, very high density, which means Zik at the target. He was interested in what other features had stones, because they demanded an insanely huge source of energy. The guy went around several more rooms, but unfortunately they all turned out to be empty. There was only the last room in which he was not yet. In the middle of the room there was a huge glass cube, and Zik decided to ask the system what function this item performs. What the system said about this subject plunged the guy into a real shock. He could not think that he would find such a treasure. The tablet sent a message that the heritage of Tirakan Draker was found, namely the heart of the damned dragon of the Bogamut. Zik could not believe, only to think. His great-grandfather left the heart of the murdered dragon as a gift. This explains the ominous sensations that he experienced when he entered the pantry. Well, now the guy had completely different sensations. The system suggested that the heart of the dragon, Bogamut, reacts to the administrator, and Zik, it clearly felt. He heard the dragon reported that he should soon kill them all, but so far he did not understand the meaning of these words. Why exactly he became elected, why the universe decided that it was Zik who should find the heart of the dragon, which his ancestor left here. For some time he looked at the glass cube in which the most mysterious object was stored in this building, and did not know what to do next. It still seemed to him that he was not alone in this room, and after him someone continued to observe further. The system gave a hint. It was necessary to get rid of the strong curse that came from the heart of Bogamut. For this, a reward was supposed. But to do this, Zik had to activate one of the skills, namely Indomitable Mental Protection. But here's the bad luck. The tablet said that at this stage this skill could not be activated. In the head, the strange and terrible words of the dragon were heard louder and louder that we need to kill them all. It seemed to Ziku that his head would simply burst from an overabundance of sensations. He could not completely control his body in action. His mental body was split into two parts, one of which already belonged to the dragon Moor. Bogamut could even talk to Zeke. But, put all his efforts in activating all the skills that is possible, Dracy managed to cope with the curse of the dragon. The system said that the administrator coped with an unscheduled task and received the ownership of the dragon's heart as a reward. In addition, Zik Dracy received the skill of endless endurance and also activated the skill of a healing factor so that his body could regenerate. But even after all this, the guy did not fully understand why his ancestor handed him the heart of the dragon Bogamut. Just now he felt like a dense source of mana penetrates into his body, but he has no ability to accept this mana. Zik Dracy clearly understood that without a place for storing all these magic stones, mana would simply destroy his body. It was necessary to make some decisions very quickly, so as not to stay here for several more centuries. Since no normal thoughts occurred to the head, Zik decided to call for the help of the soul. Then he realized that with the help of the air he could hide Manu and subsequently seal her in the etheric hole. While all this magic boiled, the air in the room was heated to the limit. Different energies mixed with each other. Then a terrible fiery whirlwind came from somewhere and rushed right to the ceiling, throwing a guy a few meters from a glass cube. Zick Dracy generally ceased to understand what was happening with him and around him. Real dark magic was happening here. When he opened his eyes, he realized that he was in a huge funnel, which remained in the ground from a fiery vortex. The guy was slowly reached the realization that he was alive, and even in his hands he held the magic heart of the dragon. He once again went to the glass club, examining it from all sides, still could not understand how the heart fell into his hands, and then it all on the body. It looked like it was a mother really lay the ancient dragon Bogamut. Perhaps the imprint of the dragon's heart appeared on his body due to the fact that he sealed Manu Bogamut. He turned to the system, and there it gave out information that Zick Draker absorbed the heart of the damned dragon. The absorbed mother changed the body of the administrator, and it was changed to the divine body, and now Zick has the right to open the secure library of Tarakan Draker. So, the book of entry-level tasks was successfully unlocked by the young cadet Zick Draker. But the tablet said that the ancestor had another gift for the guy. For this, you need to follow the specified link. The guy stood and did not know what to do further, of course. What was interesting? What was still preparing his great-grandfather for him? When he opened the line of the condition, his eyes seemed to be rounded to the size of the earth. This simply could not be. The building of the Platinum Mansion of the Academy of Knights was drowned in the moonlight. There was a deep night on the street. Zick Dracy finally was able to get to his room and, locked from the inside, finally could calm down a little and lay out everything in their places. Power and physique went to him as a reward. It seems that the spell can be unlocked as soon as he becomes stronger. The authorities meant that now a guy can control the thoughts of the dragon, and the physique can work at the highest level. Then again a window appeared, connected not with the second dying gift, but with the ancestor Tarakan himself. To open the Tarek's protected library on Draker, Ziku needed to update the information on the tablet and go into the protected library folder. Further, the system proposed to move to the place where it is possible to update the information. For this, she proposed to use the virtual card. The map paved the way for Valgal, the most prestigious school in the training of knights on the whole continent. Zick learned that outsiders, besides the administrator, are prohibited from entering this territory, but now he has such an opportunity. Since there is something that is connected with the dying gift of his ancestor, it is possible to change your plans a little. It looks like Ziku will have to continue to be part of this damned family, and now he needs to get a reward at the end of the assignment. The system said that the training for a low-level administrator begins. It was something like a mission of the Adventurers Guild, or a mercenary task. The guy was in a huge mirror room. The floor was equipped with small blue monitors instead of tiles. Zick Dracy had no idea where he got, what kind of place it was, and for what purpose the system transferred it here. It was very similar to the fact that he was simply teleported from one reality to another, but interesting. Now everything was different. It seemed that this place was different from what was last time. Now the guy has seen the approaching silhouettes of terrible monsters, which held in his hands terrible bats with iron tips. These were the orcs, which Ziku Draker would need to win in the training quest for a certain time. The guy thought that the training system was trying to create situations in which he could use all his skills. For a minute, Zick thought that it would be nice if in his last life he could also use this kind of advantages. But now it was necessary to win a battle with the orcs, so the guy began to activate all the skills that only occurred to him. This time, the sword also did not let down his master, and after half an hour, a whole detachment of monsters was easily eliminated. The system told the guy that his body is now able to work at the highest level. The speed of the body and the rate of broadcasting inside increased. A moment later, the teleport worked again, and the guy returned back to the academy. Now he was in the training room. At first he thought that maybe all this was just an illusion, but all what happened seemed incredibly real. Zick looked into the states of the tablet, where it was reported that he received additional bonuses of time and 40 points. Then the guy realized that he could easily buy any objects and skills, simply using the system. Here it was possible to acquire the rarest relics, but their purchase was worth a fortune, according to Zick. The guy came up with a working scheme. He can sell some relics, or put them up for auction to earn extra money. This probably no one else will think of this, so the Draker could put together a fortune. Zick was very tired. He had a terribly difficult day, so the guy decided to return to his room and relax a bit. This time, the guy really managed to get enough sleep. He was awakened by the rays of the sun flowing through the window into the room. Quickly gathering, the guy headed for the Professor Fan, who was already waiting for his strange student. The professor was only interested in one question: how the guy managed to endure the most durable mana out of the mysterious library. Each time, stones of high density are found on the continent. They are recorded using various ancient texts, and ownership is issued to them. Thus, check the registration number. You can find out where and when the Stone of Mana and its current owner was found. But the whole strangeness of the situation was that the stone that was in the hands of the Fanon was not registered anywhere. But Zika, it was not at all interested in whether he did not care if he got this relic in a legal way. He had to act. Therefore, the professor and his young student hastily headed for the house of the Master of Graham. They had good news for a man. A real miracle happened. Thanks to this mana stone, the Master will be able to resume his work and will develop new swords. The strength and energy of these stones will help to construct an ideal frozen to harden new swords that Graham will create in the future. Two young people knocked on the Master's door. Zik wanted to quickly see Graham's expression when he sees what they granted. The Master appeared on the threshold and immediately smiled at the guests, and those, without tightening for a long time, handed him a small, beautiful box. Graham immediately understood what the professor and his student came with, and he did not pay much attention to the box. But Zik asked the man to open a gift that he immediately made, and then almost fainted with happiness. Only a few minutes later, having come to his senses a little, the Master Graham decided to ask where his friends got the mana of the highest sample. Zik explained that this is the second dying gift of Tarek and Draker. It turned out that his great-grandfather, to the bones of the brain, was a terrible collector. Master Graham bowed low to his guests and began to thank them, assuring them that now he would surpass all the expectations of Zika Draker. He promised that in a very short time he would create a blade for Zik Draker, and will do it at all costs, even at the cost of his life. Now this man was motivated as ever before, and a bunch of ideas about the manufacture of new models have already appeared in his head. And Graham also thanked Zika Draker about 10 times for the guy returned him to a normal life and made him believe in his strength again. After all, a few days ago, a man drank a bottle behind a bottle and lived without any purpose, but now everything has changed dramatically. Saying goodbye to Master Graham, Zik Draker came out of the forge and decided to take a little walk through the fresh air. He was wondering what the first sword would be from the new roasting. And the Master, only having spent guests from the house, immediately set to work. He quickly wanted to surprise the young knight with his products. More than anything, Zik Dracy was happy that he could again find himself in his cozy room. He spent a lot of energy and time for the creation of an ideal sword, but to hope that the result will be worth it. 3 weeks have passed since the strange moment he fought with Duke Draker, and then received a note from him. And only the guy remembered this terrible man, as the sash of the window swung open, and a gardener appeared in the Zika room with his own person. It seemed to Draker that the Black Knight was now in a very bad mood. His eyes burned real anger. The man asked why the guy did not come to his greenhouse, but he calmly answered, simply did not want to see this man. But it seems Duke was very decisively configured. He went to Ziku and demanded that the guy reveal the whole truth about his abilities. A second later, he pushed the guy with such force that Zik instantly fell out of the window of his room, which was located very high. Zik Draker flashed his whole life before his eyes, but he caught on in time and activated the ability of excessive dexterity and strength. He had no plans to die now, so the guy deftly grabbed the railing of the lower balcony, and then with a slightly one jump was again in his room. It seemed that the gardener was not even surprised at such a trick. He again asked the guy if he had a desire to organize a second battle. Duke was even a little offended regarding the guy's actions, like a regular mockery, and he asks for a good way for now. Therefore, now the man gave the guy only 5 seconds for thought. Then Zik should give an answer, and it is better if he is positive. But Draker answered 3 seconds later that he would not fight again with a person who did not even bother to explain who he really is. In the end, the guy added that he would never believe in a fairy tale that this man is an ordinary gardener of the Academy of Knights. It seems that Zik was not too polite because after his words the gardener inflicted another crushing blow to him. Now the poor guy was in the corner of his room, breaking a bunch of expensive furniture when falling, and rammed the wall with his head. A moment later, the gardener turned out to be near him and held out his hand, while saying that his name was Duke Dracy, and he was really a Black Knight. It even became a little ashamed, so for disrespect for a family member, a noble Black Knight, he brought his sincere apologies. Duke's face was distorted in real bewilderment. He began to reach him that the guy had long guessed who the man was actually. Duke even felt uneasy, and he decided to go out onto the balcony to breathe air. This boy reads it as an open book. Zik shouted to the man so that he would not leave. He still needs to explain a lot, for example, why he is now not a Black Knight. But Duke Dracy sharply abandoned the explanation and said that their conversation was finally completed on this. But the young knight has not yet finished, since Duke Dracy told the truth about himself. Now is the time of Ziku to reveal all the cards. The guy abruptly caught up with the man and crouched near him, then said that he had a plan to get into the disciples to the Wild Draker. It seemed that the man was not surprised. On the contrary, he agreed to become a mentor Zika Draker. Then Zik became knee deep and announced his intention to become a student of the Great Black Knight, because with his help the guy will gain the necessary wisdom and strength. The man was surprised by the very fact that this young man even knows by heart the student's oath, because now it is used very rarely. Then a long conversation followed. Zika was interested in absolutely everything about this person, especially why Duke agreed to become his teacher. After all, the Black Knight was known for not taking absolutely anyone. Andre was his only student until that time. Perhaps during their last duel, Drake saw in Zeke a potential that exceeds the abilities of the Knight Andre. But Duke Dracy decided not to comment on his decision, but he invited the guy to guess why he became a student of the Black Knight. Zeke suggested that he was the best of the best, but the Knight stopped him, said that if he was so arrogant, he would also take the Rhine to Rune as a student. Then, nevertheless, Duke said that he really liked the persistence of the guy, because in order to achieve the level of a Red or Black Knight, one talent is not enough. Since the talented never encountered problems, they quickly give up in the face of really serious problems. Duke was right. The most famous geniuses, who prophesied the fate of the Red Knights, not only do not get this title, but also remain Blue Knights until the end of their life. Suddenly, the Black Knight said that they urgently need to stop chatting because it is high time to take the first lesson. Thus, the teacher and his only student were in the training hall of the Western Greenhouse. It really had to get away from talking to business. It seemed that Duke was up to some terrible plan, because he ordered the guy to run in a circle almost immediately as they came to the room. If the teacher wanted to check the endurance of Zik, then he will do not do, because the guy owned this ability 100%. But it turned out that the teacher stopped Zika only in order to inflict a training blow to him, but the guy cleverly turned out. The next second, the Dryer decided to attack the Black Knight first, but did not expect him to fight back with such a frantic one. Then the teacher stopped abruptly, said that the guy had some problems with checking the pulse. He understood this in the hospital ward when Zika was visiting. Then they fought in the greenhouse, and now the master forced Zika to run 500 circles. But even after that, he did not feel a drop of the aura of the young knight. And now the young Dryer does not allow the teacher to check his pulse, so he concludes that the guy does not know how to use his aura. The men began to train, and during training the Black Knight said that he had seen that bronze statue. Then a hype rose due to an unprecedented golden glow, and everyone was interested in looking at this phenomenon. Therefore, now in the Black Knight, it is incredibly interesting why Zik Dracy does not allow him to check his pulse, so he is hiding something. The man realized that the guy was not suspecting him. Dracy is not able to manage the aura, and the situation is out of the ordinary. Zik thought that he was very lucky that Duke himself was standing in front of him, because no one would have suspicion about his aura. There is no need to lie further, unlike his past life, where he was the first awakened loser in the family. He has the ability to reflect mana, and this fact proves that Zik Dracy is purebred, but he really cannot use aura. And this truth should hide him in the most secret lie, and now he asks for forgiveness for not talking about this before. Zik almost burst into tears. If everyone finds out that Dracy cannot use the aura, he will simply be thrown out of the academy. The guy was very cunning in his plan, so he was sure that such a performance for Duke should work with a bang. The Black Knight was a little sad and thought. He released the hand of the young man, but apparently he was going to say anything. The man carefully again examined the guy from head to toe. Well, the aura did not feel at all, despite the fact that Zik successfully woke up. Even having checked the pulse of Zika Draker several times, he still cannot be sure that the rite of the blessing was carried out correctly. The language thought that even if it is true that he could not awaken with the aura, he should find this reason without assistance. So far, he will deny everything, and then it will be visible. First, you need to build the right relationship with this person. It was often called unstable those who were poorly versed in the concept of classes. This was worth expecting a guy. Zik decided to ask the Black Knight, as he understands the term inconsistent, and he replied that this is just a person with abnormal abilities. For example, there are people who are able to activate the aura at the same time, or look into the future, but there are very few of them. Honestly, most people do not relate to abnormal abilities, so the Black Knight gave the guy advice to keep quiet about his uniqueness. But Zik said that the reason why the master considers him inconsistent is his crazy endurance and the ability to restore. Whatever damage, the treatment of internal wounds requires more time, but the guy is restored almost instantly. But this is a lot of energy. Zik had a hypothesis that since his energy is constantly consumed due to endurance and healing, it is almost no left to perceive the aura. It sounded believable, which is why the guy cannot use the aura, and he will not be able to justify the expectation of a Black Knight. But the man only smiled and asked the guy not to think about it. He uses the art of the storm. It is special, and does not imply the use of the aura. In fact, special art was a special technique created by Duke Draker, which reached great heights. Usually this skill is used to kill dragons, so it would be more correct to use the aura, but his art of the storm involves the guy's trained body. He decided to demonstrate everything in action and asked Zika to carefully follow him, which the guy took pleasure in. When Duke Dracy began to act, Zik was so amazed that even the word could not pronounce. It was an exciting sight. It seemed that the man was moving so quickly that he could be seen simultaneously in several parts of the hall. Zik only managed to follow the movement. The Black Knight stopped, looked at the guy, and asked if everything was clear to him in his technique. Zik nodded in the affirmative and asked for permission to repeat the trick of the master, to which the man also nodded his head in consent. Zik jumped so strongly that in the concrete floor there was an imprint of his foot, which indicated his endless power. Now it was the turn of Duke Draker to observe the lightning movements of his student, and he coped excellently. Now, repeating the exact movements of his teacher, the guy could see something that he simply did not notice before, and it was very pleased. Obviously, some steps of the knight were made as if he fought with someone. The others were for an attack, the others to dodge the blow. Behind every step of the Black Knight stood a clear, definite goal, and it was all now so obvious to Zik that he almost went crazy with joy. The Black Knight was pleased with the successes of the young man, but nevertheless he understood that there was an even greater difference between his actions and the actions of the guy. The guy was also pleased with himself, so he asked the teacher if his skill would have enough to gain the confidence of a black rank. This behavior of this arrogant boy terribly enraged the Black Knight. Ziku definitely needs to be a little more modest. The next morning, all the cadets of the Knight's Corps gathered in the building of the Academy canteen. This morning did not portend anything bad for Zik. A month has already passed since the moment Duke began to actively deal with a guy, so Zik had additionally ate and tried to relax well to resume his strength. During breakfast, the teacher Andre suddenly approached the guy and asked him to pay him a few minutes of his attention. Andre's question did not find a young man in a blur. He expected that he would ask how Ziku managed to persuade the gardener to deal with him. The young Dracy smiled impudently. The rumor that he was doing with Duke Draker through the whole academy, and even reached Andre. Pulling an innocent smile on his face, Zik replied that he did nothing special. Mr. Dexter chose him. Andre looked at the guy for some time at point blank, and then, as if by chance, said that probably purebred still played a role. Without hesitation, Zik decided to hook the man for the living and said that Andre had a real inferiority complex, and this is very noticeable. Even at first, Duke became interested in him because of his pedigree. But does Andre really think that Sir Dexter of those who choose students for such a simple reason? The fact that Ziku Draker managed to intrigue him and use this intrigue in order to become his student is definitely not evidence of his abilities, is completely different. He gave Andre the advice, instead of an empty waste of time to ensure that an ego of the inferiority complex to be chosen could better make a little effort. After breakfast, the guy went to train in the arena of the Western Greenhouse, where the famous Black Knight was already waiting for him. Entering the arena, the guy realized that the Black Knight was not alone here. There was another person who actively wrapped circles, engaged in running, and it was Andre. The teacher and student looked at the man in bewilderment and did not understand at all why he was running out. And Andre really wound up probably 1,000th of a circle and did not even pay attention to two spectators who were closely watching him. Duke said that Andre had come to him and begged him to take him as a student. If not, then he did not even mind being a servant, if only to be next to the Black Knight. And then Mr. Duke blurted out that he would definitely take him if he could run 2,000 circles without an aura, and now they see the result. To be honest, Zik first thought that Andre was an ordinary self. Good idiot. But in fact it turned out that this man had a steel character. The guy drew attention to the trash, which stood in the corner of the room. It turned out that Andre had already changed his second set of clothes, running. The next morning, all the cadets were gathered in the courtyard of the Knights Academy. Its master was supposed to come to the educational institutions. Young people did not really want to meet with the head of the Knightly Guild, but there was nothing to do. Such is the law of this educational institution. After some time, the manager shouted so that everyone was giggling and greeting the head of the academy. Howard Dracy, the head of the Knights Academy, slowly came out of the carriage. The man carefully looked around all the cadets and smiled pretty. Well, as it turned out after a few minutes, everyone did not gather here for the head of the academy, because another carriage drove up, very expensive and luxurious. A middle-aged man seemed, and as it turned out, he was the founder of this academy, in front of which Howard Dreyer bowed his head low. The head did not dare to raise his eyes. He loudly uttered the words of greeting for a man and ordered all the cadets to bow to him. It was at this moment that the clock broke exactly noon, and Zik, who stood with the others in the square, thought that it was very symbolic. For some reason, a fragment from a past life surfaced in his memory, Especially clearly he saw a hand that approaches his neck to kill. The founder of the academy patted Howard on the shoulder and said that the man worked on glory. Howard replied that this was nothing in comparison with what the founder was busy. He was the only one who truly understood this, the head of the third transcendental family of the dragon murderers, Arthur Dracy. Howard bowed low again, said that today it was very hot on the street, and they should go to the hall of the academy buildings. But Arthur stopped him. He climbed a high hill and decided to make a welcoming speech for all young cadets. The man asked for students of the Knights Academy to train for a long time and persistently, because their development would decide the durability of the existence of killing dragons. All young people looked with enthusiasm at this man, even forgetting to breathe and blink. They idolized Arthur. Everyone in chorus. The guys screamed that they were glad to welcome their founder, and they would persistently train to glorify the name Dracy. Only after that did the founder again drew attention to Howard and said that now he is ready to walk through the audience of the academy. After some time, Arthur ordered to call to his office the young cadet Zika Draker, and the guy appeared immediately, once again greeting the founder. The man smiled and asked Zika to feel in his office at home. He simply invited the cadet to talk. Arthur put a cup of tea in front of the guy and his favorite sweets, and Zik realized that he was reported even about the food that the guy liked. Once there were rumors that even the emperor did not see some joys of life, but probably there was nothing that the Dryers did not see in life. Now this guy did not seem to be a hearing, and Arthur said that he called him because he found out that Duke had taken a student. The guy nodded and mentally remarked that Arthur did not walk around the bush, asked directly, which reached him a great service. Zik Dracy said that he was really studying with Duke in order to become the strongest person on the continent in the future. Arthur carefully looked at the guy, but by his gaze it was impossible to determine what this strange and domineering man was thinking about. Zik decided to continue his thought. He needs power in order to feel absolutely free in this world. In principle, the guy did not lie at all. It was pure true. He wants such a life and will try to do everything for this. The air near Arthur Draker began to be filled with a blue aura. He said that in this case, Zik Dracy would surpass even himself. Zik realized that the matter is in the astral mosque, because he gives power over all the living in the radius of action, which makes it the top of the use of an aura available only to Black Knights. The guy did not think that he would be in such a strange and ridiculous situation. At that moment, he really felt weak and vulnerable. One Zik Dracy knew for sure. He would not make himself a panka and humiliate himself before this formidable man. He is also not of a timid dozen. He just needs to pull himself together and withstand this conversation, prove himself and understand Arthur. He is on the right path. Arthur got up from the table and, despite Zika, said that this is the most interesting thing he had heard in recent years. Then the man said that he appeared here in order to support the academy and Zeke, including, but this will not be enough. The guy fleed that Duke considered the strongest person on the continent, but it turned out that the Black Knight loses compared to Arthur. Then Arthur laid a beautiful box with an engraving of the golden dragon on the table and said that this was a gift to the guy because he became Duke's student. Zik opened his eyes wide in surprise when he opened the box. There was a black card, and the guy perfectly understood what it meant. It was a unique credit card, which was very rare, and only to elect people. He did not even assume that he would ever just see it. Just having it with him, its owner can get incredible advantages anywhere in the continent. But this does not end there. Arthur, with a smile, said that the black card was discharged to their names, so Zik Dracy can use it freely at any time and for any needs. The guy politely thanked the man for such an expensive gift and said that he would use the black card only when there was an extreme need. But in fact, Zik perfectly understood that after using the credit card the system remains a record. I do such a gift. Arthur just wants to follow what the guy is doing. Arthur realized that it was better to let the guy resort to the help of a black combat detachment. And now, according to Zik, the man did not pose a threat to him. When the guy left the founder of Arthur, the man leaned back in his chair and exhaled noisily. The conversation was quite difficult. Behind him, he heard quiet steps, and then he saw the Black Knight himself, who told Arthur that he was disgusting. Duke said that Arthur for no reason began to make his daddy out of himself, although he neglected his child all this time. But the founder Arthur reminded the man that he, like the head of the family, had no other choice, so Duke's words are slander. Not expecting a special invitation to the Black Knight unceremoniously plopped down on the sofa in front of Arthur and asked him to immediately take him from here. Well, Arthur offered another option. He took out a small bottle from his cloak, on which there was also an engraving of the golden dragon, and offered Duke to drink. The drink was called the breath of the fiery dragon, and this liquid in the bottle was true. Duke did not doubt it. Arthur reminded the man that the atmosphere on the continent recently was quite strange, so he was locked at the academy. But Duke pretended that he had no idea what a man has in mind now. He said that he works only a gardener here, so he did not know all the gossip. It turned out that the emperor was crazy with the strange idea of immortality, and now tells her theory of people throughout the continent. The Black Knight wrapped his head in disagreement, because magic can only rejuvenate, but will never give real immortality. But there is one but, that if the relic, for so long looking for, will be directly related to the ancient dragon. A hard minute of silence came. The Black Knight did not answer, and he had many reasons for this. The tongue stood behind the wall of Arthur's office, but using the skill of listening, the guy knew what these two were talking about. They talk about eternal youth that the emperor wants to get so, cannot do this in any way, because it is gained only with the help of magic. Arthur suggested that perhaps eternal youth can be obtained using the relics of the ancient dragon. This is also likely. Duke nervously looked at his interlocutor and suggested that he could somehow find out exactly where the relic. Judging by the report of the Black Scene, then it should be on the territory of the northern continent. This is exactly what Duke thought. But the Empire has not yet reached the Empire. But this is just a matter of time. Soon the Emperor can find out everything. If you recall the past, who this crazy Emperor unleashed the war as soon as he climbed the throne, supposedly with the aim of uniting the continent. It seemed to Duke that the head of their empire had a little wiser in recent years, and had already abandoned this ridiculous dream. But apparently the man was deeply mistaken. Arthur replied that if he goes on and the Emperor does not stop, their continent may be in the flame of war again, but no one wants it. Arthur wanted to personally go north to find a relic, but he realized that if he left his place, the Emperor would begin to act especially recklessly. That is why the founder of the Academy came here and decided to talk with the Black Prince. Together they can solve this problem, or at least dull its activity. The gardener of the Academy did not say anything. He just knew that Arthur was a cunning person, so he simply lifted a glass with a drink and nodded. So the two men who found themselves in this strange situation decided to act together, and at least a little pacify the Emperor's zeal to gain eternal youth. Zik continued to eavesdrop on further, and the men said that together they were much stronger. Moreover, they could rely on each other at any moment. The young man used an artifact for too long for eavesdropping. Then, therefore, the exhausted fell to the floor. After the absorption of the heart of the Bogamut, his body could not avoid kidney. Now Zik had no doubt that something of the figurine that he could get before he regressed was the relic of the ancient dragon. A voice constantly sounding in his head right before his death, and a system message that he saw after regression fell into place. Now he understood what a valuable thing he received, because he pulled the most ancient relic on the continent, capable of fulfilling the greatest desire of the Emperor. Therefore, he mobilized the hunting dogs, which were an elite detachment of killers at the imperial court, so that they grab and eliminate. At that moment, Zik thought little because he was completely absorbed in revenge, and he did not care what exactly was the figurine that he grabbed from the cave. Finally, he now found the key to the main salvage, the administrator's system, which sent him to the past, is the function of the relic of the ancient dragon. But the guy did not leave the thought of who, and most importantly why he created something similar, and why he was drawn into this story. Outside the wall, Arthur Drarist said goodbye to Duke, and the gardener promised that he would immediately begin to fulfill the assignment that the founder gave him. Closing the door behind his guest, Arthur Dracy exhaled noisily. He will finally be able to stay at least a little alone with his thoughts. And the man had a lot of thoughts, and the future of the entire continent will depend on how he will build a strategy for the struggle with the Emperor. At this time, Zik thought that if it was true that the relic that the Emperor was looking for, then as a return to the past is connected with eternal youth and immortality. Behind the wall, the guy heard steps, and the next moment the door swung open sharply, and Arthur appeared on the threshold, which heard someone under the door. The morning of Zika Draker, as always, began with training in the hall. Today he decided to get a guide with a sword. After some time, the assistant Decker entered the hall and said that a fellow student had come to Ziku, and the guy ordered the visitor to let the visitor into the hall. The guy could not even imagine who could be, but after a second, Liam Stone, a faithful servant of Jacob Wardk, rushed into the hall. Without saying a word and not even saying hello, the guy immediately fell to his knees in front of Zik Draker and began to ask for a conversation. Zik Dracy was terribly surprised at such a visit, and even more the behavior of this guy, but still decided to listen to him and find out what the problem was. As it turned out, after a few minutes, Liam Stone wants to become a faithful friend of Zik, but if he does not accept him, then he is ready to be even subordinate to Draker and give himself to the guy of all. The guy shouted that he did not want to deal with Jacob Wardek more, because he turned out to be a real scoundrel. He simply took and exposed his assistant and servant. They do not even do it with animals, and he was put up as an unnecessary kitten. The guy also said that he really wanted to enter the Valgal Academy. His tongue remembered that it was already in a past life, This guy was also obsessed with the academy. But Dracy replied that in this case, Liam was worth going to the Rhine family of Turin, or in extreme cases to the Wintermen, but not to him. Dracy tried to explain to the guy that he has no support from the family. He lives on its own and acts as he decides. Therefore, unfortunately, with all his desire, he cannot help Liam Stone get to the Valgal Academy. And there is another very scrupulous question how Zick can trust Liam after what was between them in the near past. After all, he can easily spy on Zim Draker on the orders of Jacob Wardk, and Zick will not even know about it. Well, something incredible happened here. Liam Stone took out his dagger from the scabbard and raised him high above his head. Then he said that he would cut off his tongue, so that Zick was sure that Liam would not transmit information to anyone. He simply will not be able to do this. And so that the guy does not run away from Zick Draker, he can cut off one leg, so he can't even walk normally, not like to run away. For Zika Draker, this was already too much. He realized that the guy was in such a state that he could not joke at all. He says everything in all seriousness. His eyes burned with the hope that Zick would accept him, and at the same time there was too much hatred of Jacob Wardek. Zick Dracy recalled in a past life, and in this, it also madly wants to become stronger than everyone. Probably this guy has the same dream. Perhaps he will become a good assistant to Ziku, because he cannot say that Liam is weak or cowardly. Due to the total despair, Liam Stone stuck his dagger right into the concrete floor, and he did it with such force that the knife entered almost the handle. Such an action shocked and scared Zika Draker. It turned out that this guy could be insanely desperate, and this is not always good in military affairs. He looked at Liam and said that if he could withstand at least one movement during the attack, then Zick will gladly accept him to his service. Liam slowly got up from his knees, looked Ziku right in the eye and said only one word. Thanks. But this was enough for Draker. Honestly, Liam Stone thought that it would be quite simple to withstand only one trash of the Draker Zika. He was training for several days, so there would be no problems. In addition, Liam also knows how to use his aura, and even very good, and he is also the year of Zika Draker, so they are almost equal. It was difficult for him to breathe, because the guy understood all the seriousness of the situation, and knew very well how well Zick Dracy was fighting. In addition, it was necessary to take into account the fact that the last 3 months his opponent has been very actively trained with the Black Knight Duke. The battle really came out very harsh, dangerous. Each of the opponents understood why he was fighting and realized the consequences. Zick said that he was very hoping that Liam Stone would be a more experienced and serious enemy, but he turned out to be a rag. From the blow, Liam Stone fell to the ground, but the guy was not going to give up at all. His determination was worthy of respect. Apparently, Jacob really abandoned this guy if Liam was not his servant. Such a distant relative could not even enter the cradle. Even Zika himself, a direct descendant, was expelled from the academy. So it is not surprising if Liam is also excluded now. He has a lot of reasons to worry. Well, is it worth it to suffer like that? Because from the past life, Liam was expelled from the academy, and his knightly order broke up. But the guy reached the Crimson World, and he was called the King of Mercenaries. Zick Dracy was about to leave the hall, but some power stopped the guy, and he looked around again to look at Liam. He looked at the cadet with pleading eyes and asked to give him another chance, and for some reason, Ziku became sorry for this guy. He stopped and was silent for a while, then informed Liam Stone that he would give him the last chance, but with only one condition. He reminded Liam that if you need to shut up, then they cut off the tongue, and if you need to limp, then break the leg. The next moment the guy offered the poor man to cut off his right hand, so he will prove that Ziku Draker would forever remain faithful. Liam Stone's eyes lit up with a strange fire. Zick could not understand what this guy was at the moment, and how he would react to his words. After all, to be left without a hand, it meant to never be a swordsman again, and no one in their right minds to such a step to agree. After a little silence, Liam Stone whispered quietly that he still needs to train a lot, and for this, you need to have 2 hands. Zick was silent, and Liam turned and headed for the exit. Dreher shouted so that he would not be upset. If he did not fall into Valhalla, he could reach a Crimson Knight. But then the Dracy's tongue noticed that the guy turned around. He headed for his sword, who was stained on the floor, and pulled him out. The total of a second passed, and Zick realized that now this abnormal madman would chop off his hand. He had already faded the ball. But fortunately, he reacted very quickly. He ran to the guy and tried his sword to knock out a weapon out of Liam Stone's hands. Stone's sword again flew to the side, because Zick still managed and did not allow the irreparable. Then he would not forgive himself this act. Liam Stone stood bewilderment for several seconds. He did not quite understand why Zick Dreher did just that, because a minute ago he asked to chop off his hand. Then Zick Dracy jumped to the guy and angrily asked why he had no brains at all. You can't comply with stupid orders, even if a person gives them higher and more status than you. But the guy quietly replied that the hand is not at all important to him, because if he does not stay with Zik, he can lose much more and more important than one limb. Zik exhaled and warned the guy that if he threw something like this again, he would throw Liam out of the threshold, regardless of whether he was devoted to him or not. Dracy still took Liam Stone to his subordinates, and an hour later the guy sat in the dining room and planned his future life at the academy. Liam Stone has already thanked Zika Draker for 1,000 times for not refusing him and accepted his subordinates. Now he really will begin another life. But Zik Dracy wanted to know the true reason why the guy came to him when Jacob Wardeck threw him. Liam was a little sad, and it was clear that it was very difficult for him to support this topic of conversation. But there was nothing to do. He had to lay out the whole truth. As it turned out, the guy has a mother whom he is madly loved and tries to take care of a woman, but now she was falling into a terrible disease. After a couple of days, as Jacob Wardeck drove Liam, the guy received a letter that his mother had become much worse. She is in a dying condition. Now he does not have funds to give his mother normal treatment, and rural doctors cannot even determine what kind of illness it is. That is why the guy decided to join the Academy of Valhalla, because students and their families melting better medical knowledge on the continent. The guy also said that the mother's body was covered with strange red spots in the form of roses, and Zik listened attentively and recorded something on paper. He instantly remembered his past life, and the words of a terrible disease flashed in his head. Its symptoms were a periodic heat and stains throughout the body. It finally dawned on him that these were the symptoms of red flowering, a terrible disease, which in 5 years will walk along the central continent. This will be a very terrible period. People will become infected at a terrible speed. The disease will spread very quickly and take the lives of many people. All this will continue until scientists develop sensational medicines which will stop the terrible epidemic. Zik Dracy handed the leaf to Liam and said that this is a prescription for the medicine for his mother. It is easy to cook, so even a rural doctor will cope. He knew how to treat this disease. In the future, the brilliant brothers of alchemist Al and Jeff would develop medicines to save the central continent from the epidemic. But the Alchemist Guild, greed for money, used desperate people to get exorbitant profit for their work. Well, when the brothers learned about this, they immediately unveiled the recipe and distributed it among the population, which is why Zik from a past life knew to treat this disease. He told Liam that now he has a medicine for his mother, and there is no more need to go to Valchal or continue to be a subordinate of Draker. Leahy Stone was insanely grateful to his new comrade for the prescription of the medicine. Even his tears appeared before his eyes, and his voice trembled a little. But he got up from the table and said that he could not abandon his word said earlier. He had already devoted his life to the service of Ziku. Then the guy got up from the table and sank to one knee in front of the Draker. He vowed to serve the knight by faith and truth until the end of his days. Dracy thought that it was nice to have a person who would become the king of mercenaries in the future. The guy now had no doubt about the reliability of Liam Stone. At this time, the head of the academy, Howard Dracy, ordered to bring the young manager Avienne to his office, and the guy immediately appeared to his superiors. Mosen had a proposal to Howard Draker, as a man looks at in this semester, to increase the complexity of tasks for the cadets. The head of the academy was surprised by such a strange proposal, so he asked a logical question why it was necessary to increase the difficulty. Ares bowed once again, asked for forgiveness for his impudence, but said that the current freshmen are very capable guys. These are members of influential families, and even purebred awakened. If this year an exam on knightly skill is already light, as last time, then young people will not be able to prove themselves. Ares Ximenes bowed again, and the head of the academy thought about the guy's words. If this is true, then the task for freshmen should still be complicated. When the young cadet left the office of the boss, Howard Dracy thought deeply. It seemed strange to him that the cadet wanted to complicate the life of his classmates. The man was an experienced warrior and had seen a lot in his life. Now he certainly understood that the blood was not lying, and these were not empty words. At this time, the two young guys, Zik Dracy and Liam Stone, were in the training room of the academy. The subordinate Draker decided not to lose a minute and start practicing. Zik was glad to achieve a higher level of skill with such a zeal of the guy, but he knew that in the future Liam Stone would surpass all expectations and would become a great warrior. It was a unique test at the Dracy Academy, during which students, divided into pairs, should go through complex dungeons for a certain amount of time. The cadets had to break into pairs. Of course, Zik Draker took his subordinate Liam Stone into the fellow travelers, and he was very happy to prove himself and his abilities for the first time. Zik asked his partner to behave calmly and naturally, because too much excitement entails mistakes, and too high the level of calm will lead to arrogance. In the courtyard of the academy, the cadets who broke into pairs have already gathered. There was also Rhine Turin, who was the first to pay attention to the couple of Dracy and Stone. The manager announced that the next to the dungeon cave, Zick Dracy and Liam Stone were sent, and the guys fearlessly entered. But being in the room, the guys met with the second manager, who said that a different path was prepared for them. It was quite suspicious because all the other couples headed in a completely different direction, and the manager stood and mysteriously looked at them. But there was nothing to do. There was no longer a road back, so the guys nodded and obediently headed for the indicated manager to the side. The complexity of each dungeon is different, but there was no danger to the danger. The main task was to reach the indicated point for the indicated time. Everyone was allotted for 96 hours, for which the combat skills of the cadets will be evaluated. If you bring the heads of monsters with them, you can get bonus glasses. But the most important condition for this task was to get out of the cave on time, if you do not have time to fail. Having passed the way, Liam and Zick decided to rest a little to prepare food for themselves. It was important to maintain the physical condition in normal. Then they decided to sleep a little in turn, and Zick suggested that the first to guard the first, while Stone rests a little. 16 hours passed from the entrance to the dungeon. He did not sleep before the exam and trained, which means he has been awake for more than 90 hours. The guy gradually came to the realization that the skill of endless endurance saves only from physical fatigue, but not from the mental one. In the dungeon, you never know what will happen at the next moment, so it was important for Zick to minimize risks. Sitting near the fire, the guy did not notice how he fell asleep. He dreamed of winter, a long-time temple, and a bell that signaling the approach of trouble. Then he saw a bright red flag on which there was an image of a golden dragon. The flag was visible from afar. He was approaching. And then this is a strange girl with long curly hair. She beat in the bell, notifying everyone about the approaching danger. Zick Dracy shuddered with fear and woke up. In a dream there were pictures from his past life. Now they surfaced to report something important. This dream was not the first time for the guy. Some higher forces tried to convey important information to him, but so far he could not understand which one. Stop! It was not a bell from sleep. He clearly heard the bell, and he rang somewhere very close in the cave. All this happens in reality. In order not to give out his presence, the guy very quickly opened the flask and poured water from it directly into the fire. The darkness came. The next case, he tried to wake Liam Stone as quieter as possible and informed the guy that someone was watching them intently. We need to carefully look around. It turned out that it was a creature that smells of gray and hunts flocks. It was the third of the most dangerous monsters and was called Hellish Hounds. In a past life, the Rhine Turin already brought the heads of monsters, but Zick could not even think that he would have to face Hellish Hounds. The guys hid around the corner and began to listen. Zick understood that these creatures were very large, judging by the noise and the clatter of their legs. But not Zick could even imagine Liam that these orcs were not simple hounds. These were real huge mutants. The guys did not expect such a turn of events. How to continue to act, any of them had the slightest concept. I had to react right on the go and no longer think about how to kill these creatures, but already how to save their own lives. Therefore, both cadets grabbed the swords and agreed to fight to the end, supporting each other during the battle. After the battle with these monsters and Zick, one thing understood. It was all the tricks of Avina Ziminis. It was he who decided to adjust their trap. But be that as it may, the guys defeated hyenas, and then also the troll, and received 30 points of karma for it, and this was a good bonus. Zick decided to use the virtual tablet to understand how to act further and get out of the cave on time. The tablet issued a task. It was necessary to defeat 100 monsters in 72 hours. The reward was a double number of karma points. But 100 monsters turned out to be a big problem. Even if the dungeon is huge, usually in one section there are a maximum of 3-4 types of monsters. If you look well, then 10 types of these monsters can be found. But this task will be completely difficult to complete. While Zick was thinking, Liam Stone already quickly collected all things and was ready to search for monsters. For their heads, the guy had a huge duffel bag. Both cadets decided that it was necessary to immediately advance in search of monsters, although there is enough time, but they do not know what awaits them ahead. Having passed a few kilometers, they saw how a new herd of fiery hyenas was moving on them. It was necessary to prepare and accept the battle. The guys coped with this herd of monsters in a few minutes. The duel did not cause any difficulties, and Stone already packed his heads in the bag. But a minute later, a bat flew up to the guys with a terrifying size. This task was already more complicated. Even Liam Stone was a little confused. He had never seen such huge monsters in his life, but quickly orientated himself and destroyed the monster. After a few more minutes, he also sent his head to an ugly bat to his duffel bag. Honestly, Zick for his subordinate, because he thought that he could not cope with the tasks. But Stone was a quick and experienced warrior. The guy looked at the tablet again. There was 50 hours left, and it was also necessary to find and kill 9 types of monsters. With such a success, they can most likely fail to fail, because there was nothing more to look for in this territory. But then the most interesting began. The guys again heard strange, terrifying sounds and quickly prepared for battle. In the next seconds, small firestones rained down on Zika, from which it was very difficult to dodge, and the sword helped little here. The guy shouted to Liam Stone to immediately throw a duffel bag and try to evade the stones, because it is extremely difficult to do with a bag. Liam Stone tried to untie the bag from himself, but as luck would have it, he was confused in the mount, so Zik cut all the sluts in one swing sword. It was necessary to very quickly decide how to proceed further. Every second of delay could cost both of them. Liam Stone, looking at the bloody hand of his partner, was simply horrified, because she was completely bloodied. But, as it turned out, it was the blood of monsters. And now it doesn't matter, because they headed for a huge monster of a terrible look. Dreher warned Liam that he was extremely careful, because in this battle it would be extremely difficult for him to look after his partner. At that moment, they were attacked by the worms of the dungeons, the most dangerous monster, to win over which a dozen purple knights needed. The servants of Ximenes Ares tried to glory and sent the guys the most nasty monsters, but let them not enjoy early. It's not for that Zik Draker returned here from a past life to be defeated by some kind of worm. They were attacked. Therefore, the guy gathered all his strength into a fist and desperately rushed into the battle with the monster. He also counted on the support of Liam. Even the Blue Knights tried to avoid meeting with a worm dungeon in a similar place, because this monster was able to burst underground and move there. If it happens that the battle is delayed, then two of them will not have enough time to get out of the cave in time. Dracy. I understood this perfectly, so I decided to act on the situation. It was necessary to protect himself and Liam Stone. The monster also turned out to be a speaker. It was croaking that these two in this dungeon were buried alive. But such words did not scare the young knight at all. In his young century, he already heard many such threats, but so far remained alive. He simply turned off all his thoughts and concentrated exclusively on the battle process. This is what real professionals do. The monster was also not going to retreat. The dungeon worm was a terribly strong monster, but Zik did not lose vigilance for a second. The guy fought as if it were his last battle. Clasping his teeth, he made his way forward and continued to chop the tentacle of the worm of the dungeons. Zika dawned that if you apply more transverse strikes, it brings the monster a lot of injuries, and the guy began to act. He pierced his sword into the body of the monster in the handle, thus making deep wounds and causing a terrible pain to the monster. The worm simply wriggled, scattering his tentacles in different directions, but could not do anything. The pain was exhausted. Zik glanced towards Liam Stone. The guy also fought desperately and very boldly, all his might to pacify the worm. At some point, the Dreher climbed onto the monster's back and began to apply even stronger blows, realizing that the blood pressure was weakening. Somewhere nearby, he heard the voice of Liam Stone, who was worried about his master and tried his best to help him, showing his devotion. It turned out that Liam covered his sword for anesthetics, and his main ingredient is belladonna, which is capable of dulling feelings. As it turned out, this magical ingredient is a fatal poison for worms, and today this monster got it enough. In a critical situation, recall that the belladonna concentrate is poisonous for the worm, and with improvisation using anesthetic. This was a great invention of Liam. Such prudence and the ability to adapt to a critical situation fully justified the reputation of Liam Stone. Zik shouted that at the moment when he gives a sign, Liam would have to hit the worm again with all his strength. To take this guy with him as a partner was the only and correct decision of Zik Draker. He was not mistaken. The guy rushed closer to the head of this monster, on the road, inflicting more and more beats to the monster. It was necessary to finish this performance. A second later, the guy activated the technique of soul and body and gave a sign to Liam. He hit the worm with all his fury and ended on this existence of the monster. The cadets who were able to get out of the dungeon gathered and near the walls of the destroyed castle, but there were not so many of them. The manager said that everyone can be free only after the glasses of each team are calculated, so they are now starting. Each of the participants recalled that each of them had to survive in the last few days, and they did not see some monsters. There were 30 points for passing the dungeon. Then the goblins and hobgoblin were counted with the next orcs. The Rhine of the Reina Turun had only 180 points. They almost reached a record indicator of 200 points, although it was already clear that purebred indicators were always high. The teacher called the Rhine Turun to himself and praised her. The girl's indicators were always surprised. She tried her best. When Rhine Turun and her partner was released home, the manager called the next team, because everyone stood and impatiently waited for their turn. The next two cadets scored 120 points, but it was also a high indicator that exceeded the norm by as many as 70 points. The guys envied Rhine because so far she was the leader and no one had managed to surpass her, but someday someone will definitely drive him from her pride. And this hero, of course, will be Ares Zimenus. It is he who should be the first and prove to everyone that they were in vain at him just 6 months ago. He will be able to get rid of the Rhine of Turun, just as he did with Zik Draker, placing a trap for that trap throughout the dungeon. But Ares Zimena forgot that he was not dealing with a simple cadet. Zik Dracy was not going to give up at all and prepared a lot of surprises. The next minute, Ares was heard by a familiar voice that annoyed him more and more. Turning around, the guy saw his enemy, Draker, who got out of the cave. But how is it at all possible? Wasn't the Sended Orc a monster with the highest rank? How did these two even manage to defeat the worm of the dungeons? Zik grinned and looked at Zimenus directly into his eyes. Then he asked why he was so surprised. Probably did not expect him to meet him again. Then he came close to Ares and said that he was very glad to see. They would still compete and see who would come to the victory of the first. With all his appearance, he showed that he had guessed about the meanness of Ares Zimen, so he hinted that he would still have a chance to avenge this scoundrel. From anger and disappointment, Ares did not even know what to answer this arrogant cadet. He simply burst out indignation, would have to come up with a new plan again. These pompous purebreds had long been sitting across the throat at Avon Zimenus, and he would not stop until he leaves Zika Draker behind him. But Dracy only smiled. He did not doubt my abilities for a moment, and would not continue to doubt it from his path. The manager praised the team of Draker and Stone for stamina and courage. So far, they were leading in this competition. Teacher Andre decided not to pull the rubber and calculate the points that these cadets earned in the competition. Although they lost all the heads of goblins and monsters along the road, they dragged the huge head of the dungeon into the castle's courtyard. Everyone began to shut up and point their fingers in chorus, because they were the only ones who lost a duffel bag to collect the heads of goblins. Liam Stone began to explain that the worms of the dungeon completely unexpectedly attacked them. It was because of this that they lost all the other heads during the battle. He explained to the teacher that they could not afford to fail the exam, so in the end result, they decided to get the head of the worm. Andre began to carefully study the samples of the tooth of the monster. They are goblins, gremlin, hellish hound orcs, and finally trolls. Everyone was very surprised because none of the guys even suggested that there were also trolls in the cave, and these creatures were quite dangerous. Andre explained that, judging by the amount of blood, there were several dozen of them there, but taking them all out of them would be unfair. Therefore, they will take into account only one monster of each species. Trolls and worm in the dungeons are not included in the evaluation criterion, but 368 points are still released in the result. Hearing this, Ares Zimenus became furious. He was indignant that the calculation was dishonest, because these two carried out the worm's head from the cave. But the guy quickly reminded that the head of this very worm itself costs 180 points, and this is enough for an indisputable victory. If Zimen collided with an underground worm or with a troll, he could have survived it all. But these two could. Zik Dracy, along with his partner, simply stood and smiled. They were funny from how stupid Ares Zimenus looked now. Zik, again, for the umpteenth once again put in place of this stupid and arrogant moisture. Well, it was not the end. They will still hurt. Ares, along with their accomplices, for some time stayed in complete confusion. In the end, today they were not able to defeat the Draker. More Zik will not allow anyone to dare to mock him. Let everyone know who they are dealing with and preparing for a serious removal. He managed to do something extraordinary again, because the Wintermen in their impunity went too far and manipulate dungeons just to get rid of Zik. And the guy perfectly understood that Ares Zimmons could not organize it all alone, so the plan would definitely not work. Ares is not so stupid, and he was also a little cowardly, so he definitely had to look for his students. Perhaps he was even his own father. It turned out that they were watching the Draker more carefully than he expected. If he hides his strength for too long, then this can play a cruel joke with the guy. Therefore, Zeke decided to reduce his ardor a little and just observe the situation. You need to take several days to respite. He was about to leave the yard, but he heard him called out. The guy turned and saw that Reyna Tarun himself was heading for him. As it turned out, the girl was also worried about Zek's victory, because she hoped that this time she would be called a winner. The guy understood that he had more and more enemies with every new day. He did not expect it, but now he would have to live with it. The next day, the guy went to the ring to be a little alone with his thoughts as well as to practice plenty. It turned out that he had another skill of the Devourer, which allowed to digest a large amount of food. He cost only 50 points. But when the guy began to read the current line, who realized that the description of the skill has completely changed, and this should be immediately understood. Now he can absorb the abilities of monsters, but it would be good if he acquired this skill before the start of the test in the caves. Zik immediately activated the skill of the Devourer, thinking that in the future he would definitely come in handy. But then the guy saw some strange shadow above himself. This shadow simply enveloped him and tried to take him off somewhere. It was necessary to stay with the last forces and not make sudden movements. The absorption of energy compensated for its loss. The head began to hurt much less. Perhaps this was just ordinary overwork. It seemed to the guy that he was simply born again. Mentally, I was overwork. Just like physical, he felt a complete renewal of the body. The feeling was very easy and pleasant. It was clear that the whole body of Zika could successfully recover after the former adventures. While the skill of the Devourer definitely cost its price, with its help, Zik without problems of the Mog to eliminate the negative effects of other skills. Now he can train 24 hours a day, absolutely not feeling physical fatigue and hunger. He does not need rest. And the guy decided not to hesitate otherwise training right now. He headed to the training room of the academy, where Deer had been waiting for him for a long time. Zik Dracy did not want to see absolutely no one, but the assistant said that he had a very important message. The fact is that the Master Graham sent him a ready-made sword. The master was so carried away by the work that he needed only a few weeks in order to make the copper of his dreams for the Dryker. In the past life of the guy, the sword he owned, who received from Galian, was smashed out of mithria and steel. It was extremely clear to everyone that the legendary sword was an unusual weapon, given the fact that this time the Dragon Fangs used the Zik material. The guy thought that this weapon would be very similar to the one he owned in a past life, but it turned out to be many times better. The guy took the sword from the package and took it in his hand. It seemed that the product was very bulky and stupid. He turned to the Master Graham and asked why his sword was not heavily heated, but he replied that the weapon was what it should be. I wonder why Graham thought that Ziku would suit just such a sword. The guy was still in a slight confusion. Maybe the sword only seems very strange and rude, and perhaps it should be tested in action and understand how good it is. Master Graham recalled that so far this sword has no name, and it would be worth considering what to call this product. Graham also thought for a long time over the name, but nothing good came to mind. The tongue remembered that in a last life, this weapon was called a shining sword. The guy imagined a weapon in a completely different way, because it was made of a dragon's magic fang, respectively, and his appearance should be formidable. The next moment the guy took the dagger in his hand and made himself an incision on his skin, and blood flowed out of the wound. Master Graham was terribly scared. He did not understand what this young cadet was doing. It was urgent to stop blood. Even if the healing factor owned by the guy will constantly be activated, then this is still his skill, and he must be controlled. Therefore, the tongue opened the line of the state and temporarily turned off the class skill of the healing factor, and to its great surprise it worked. And now it is necessary to name the sword. For this Zik brought the hand from which blood was dripping over the weapon, so that several drops fall directly onto the blade. Master Graham stood with his eyes wide open. He did not understand what the guy was doing, but thought that this was a new ritual of the name of the ball. It was the traditional ceremony of the northern continent region, according to which the knights called their weapons, spilling blood or aura on the sword. When the blood touched the ball, the magical ritual, the owner of the weapon plunged into an unconscious state until he finds a suitable name for the weapon. And now, Zik plunged into a strange state. There was a feeling that he was deep underwater. Strange stars flew around him, on which various names were written. It was necessary to find the one with which the knight would go further through life. This should be a new name for a completely new path, and Zik Dracy knew this perfectly, so he was in no hurry to catch the first star that came across. Suddenly, it really was seized by some whirlpool. One big drop fell into it, and real magic began. Everything plunged into pitch darkness. Zik Dracy stood in the middle of the darkness and looked up, where the glow of the golden dragon of the Bogamut was pronounced. He perfectly understood that all this is happening now, not just like that, and the universe gives him a hint regarding the name of his sword. Of all the names, he took out the name of the golden dragon, which means with his subconscious, everything is in perfect order, and he does everything right. Master Graham was in full delight, because very few knights know about this magical ritual, but Zik read about him when he studied the courtesy history. The man asked Dracy to stay for a few more minutes. He said that he wanted to convey something else to the guy. Dracy decided to rest a little and collect all thoughts into a heap. He again turned off the skill of a healing factor, because it was necessary to learn to manage passive skills. So it was possible to prevent the exposure of abilities, as happened with the Duke. There is no need to reveal the cards ahead of time, so he rewound the wound on his hand. In addition, first you need to check everything well and test the black sword in action, which, according to the master, was indestructible. Further in the state line, the guy read that the sword would also be endowed with additional abilities as it develops. The guy never heard of this. He already thought that no one and nothing could destroy this weapon, because it was created from unique material, a fang of a golden dragon. For the completed tasks, the guy received a strange chest as a reward. He did not dare to open it for a long time, trying to predict what could be inside. Opening the box, he noticed that he was almost empty inside. At first, Zik even thought that it was some kind of draw. But looking deeper inside, at the bottom of the chest, the guy saw a strange paper pipe of small size. It turned out to be a map. The system informed the guy that now he is holding a travel map of Grandmaster Kaiser, who was the hero and knight of the Clock of the Clock. This character is popular on the continent of the book, which with their knights during the trip could destroy the kingdom of Kronos, one of the greatest civilizations of the past. However, there is no evidence of the authenticity of this story, and many consider it a simple fiction, but here it turns out that King Kaiser really existed. Zik launched the card analysis function, and after a while the desired point was already indicated on a mini-card. It turned out that the location is located at the farthest point of the giant mountain chain, and it was located on the territory of the barbarians. Everything can be much simpler than Zik thought. Judging by the user level, the training was completed, the subject associated with the quest was discovered. Zik decided to unlock the quest, and was surprised to realize that these were only the first steps, and the real game begins only now. Even the awards at this level were much more valuable, so the guy decided not to bother with his choice and spent all the points that he could accumulate. Fortunately, the guy had enough glasses earned in previous tasks to purchase several units of new useful skills. One of the most valuable skills was the Dragon Claws, so the guy did not spare a huge number of points in order to get this important ability. If he correctly learns to manage this skill, then he was not afraid to even go to the country of barbarians alone. To begin with, he decided to experience this possible ability right in the training hall, and was as surprised as possible. There was a Dragon Scales earned skill, and the guy also decided to immediately activate it in order to know how to control it further. Zik trained for about an hour, trying to configure his body so that absolutely all the abilities that he managed to acquire recently coexist in it. He did not even use the aura, but despite this, even strong blows did not cause him much harm, simply reflected from the scales. It seemed that the guy put on a complete set of armor, and now no weapon could harm him. Meanwhile, many people gathered in the training hall of the Drare Academy. The cadets were embroidered into flat lines. Before the check of the cadets for the ability to manage the aura, the manager decided to remind young people with the rules. Behind the cadets stood training mannequins made in a special way. A regular blow with a sword did not even leave a scratch on them. Then Andre said that if the blow is delivered using the aura, then the mannequins will scatter. If it is not possible to destroy their mannequin, then the test is considered failed. This time, in the case of a cadet failure, you will have to start with the bottoms, and you can simply forget about the increase in the academy. Aris Zimena smiled maliciously. This training method did not differ from the training of the aura that was used in his family, especially since the course of using the aura was developed by the Zimensov house. It does not matter how talented the purebred and awakened, no one will be able to compare with Ares in the ability to control his own aura. It was precisely by Avian who called the next. Andre warned when the guy would be completely ready. He could immediately begin. The guy immediately went to his mannequin and decided to check your abilities. All those present deeply struck the resonance of his sword. He is only 13 years old, and the guy already knows how to use the resonance of the ball, and this brought everyone into a real delight. Ares Zimena slowly walked between the mannequins. He was confident in his abilities, so only a triumph expected from today's assignment. Everyone in anticipation froze, and without even breathing looked at how he broke several mannequins. Andre was satisfied with the work of the young cadet, so he said that Ares stunningly coped with the task and could rest. So he can surpass even Lord Abel himself, but this will not lead to anything good, because everyone was observing with interest further. At one point, the guy grabbed the dagger and rushed to the attack. No one expected such a thing, because he had already finished his task. Other cadets watched the situation in bewilderment, and could not understand what was wrong with this guy, and with whom he imagined himself. After Ares, several young knights did poorly at once with the task. It seemed that Ximenes had somewhat demoralized them with his behavior. But on the other hand, not a single cadet completely failed. Everyone managed to apply a mannequin at least a small cut. Respectively, no one had problems with the aura. But even at the academy, in which the most elite cadets were collected, there was one who stood out among all, and it was Reina Turun. She went to the center of the training room and became between the mannequins, then turned to the instructor with the offer. Renaturon would like the teacher to appreciate her technique for dragon hunters. For her, this is very important. But Andre stopped her. She must understand that these criteria were created for older students, and she has not yet grown to such a level. To direct your aura to the sword, and to be able to use the techniques of the art of hunting for dragons, are two completely different things. Ares Zimena smiled maliciously. He was sure that Reina would wave his sword a couple of times and immediately lose control of her aura. It seemed that the girl was digging a hole for herself, so Andre asked if the Rhine was confident in her desire, and she nodded. Thanking Andre for such an opportunity, the girl immediately took out her sword and raised it high above her head. Everyone froze in anticipation. Now Reina Turin was similar to an ancient brave knight who does not stop under any circumstances and always goes to the end. A few minutes later, several mannequins simply scattered into chips. The girl parted in earnest to prove to everyone what she was capable of. A loud whisper walked around the hall. Everyone thought that Ares controls the aura best of all, but it turned out that he could not compare with the Reina Turun. Ares Ximenes could not understand what was happening now, and how this girl is able to control the sword so cleverly. He again failed. Everyone simply froze in surprise. It seemed that there was nothing impossible for this fragile girl in this world. She is capable of anything. Zick Dracy also watched all this. The guy understood that now he needed to make absolutely all efforts in order to defeat the Rhine Turun. He recalled all his skills, also remembered that he himself did not yet fully know his aura. From the very beginning, he was not the goal of this demonstration. Reina simply wanted to prove that even purebred and awakened are not always winners. Zick Dracy went to the mannequins next. He had never come to such classes before, because everyone looked at a guy with genuine interest. Teacher Andre said that this is the result of the dispute that he won, and now he and Rain will compete for first place. Zick Dracy was a unique golden, stuck awakened, a beginner who was able to beat Lord Abel's record in the underground passage. Now he will fight for the championship and the opportunity to be called the best cadet of the Academy of Dracy. The guy activated all his abilities, because today it was decided how the cadets and teachers would relate to him at the academy. Some will laugh, but most of his enemies, he will still make himself respect. The guy was never a weakling. He was confident in himself, but did not think that today's task would be so difficult for him. Well, whatever one may say, the guy hoped until the last that everything would be in order. Not in vain, he returned back to the past. Zick completely concentrated on his sword and mannequins, then took advantage of the technique of dragon hunters and inflicted the first blow. Reina Turun carefully watched the guy. She realized that this guy was perfect even compared to Instructor Andre. Dreher cooked the equipment for dragons hunters for dragons for 2 years before his regression, so he could accurately calculate the right direction of the blow. He knew what position of the work leg he needed to choose, even able to control the flows of his aura. His body moved on its own, without control of the owner. He spent a lot of time working out all these techniques, but everything turned out to be not in vain. After a few minutes, all the mannequins were broken. Run on the basics that he studied once again. Never is superfluous. This turned out to be enough to cope with a difficult task. Also, this will be enough to motivate the Rhine Turin, because this girl needs to learn a little more. Zick Dracy looked around and looked at the work done. It turned out that his aura flow was too powerful. He destroyed almost everything. Performing this task, the guy tried to show the power of the level of the Rhine, but it seems that he again attracted the excessive attention of the rest of the cadets. Ares Ximenes could not believe his own eyes, how this impudent does it and why he acts so on his nerves recently. All other cadets were also surprised to the core, because this cadet has only been studying the first year, already reached the level of the Purple Knight, and Howard Dracy was also surprised. The man even invited the young knight to his office for a serious conversation about how the guy managed to reach this level at 13 years old. He simply replied that there is nothing unusual here. He studies, just like the rest of the cadets. This is just luck, and no more. But the guy was followed by a strange but very tempting offer. Howard invited him to graduate from the Academy Dracy ahead of schedule. The leadership swallowed the bait much faster than the guy thought. He stood out too much, and it was inevitable, so Zick agreed. The boss remained in his chair for a long time after the young cadet left his office. Too many memories surged. The next morning, 2 people who wanted to finish the Academy Draker, Zick and Rhine, gathered in the hall for training the aura. Rhine Turun, with her whole appearance, tried to show her superiority, but it came out extremely bad. Secretly, she just admired Zick. They did not have to wait a long time. Confident steps were heard, and a man entered the training room. It was a senior knight from the main family, the Owl Dryer, and it is he who will take the exam today and 2 cadets. Zick's eyes climbed on his forehead because he knew this person from a past life. This is the Silent Sword himself. That is what this knight was called. Zick remembered some fragments from a past life. Then they were too fragmented. It was impossible to add a complete picture. The memories were from those times when Dracy was a mercenary in the detachment and considered all of the Dracy family by sales liars. A frame surfaced in his memory when a silent sword sat over the body of a dead man. It seemed that the man was saddened by the loss of his loved one. Stepping closer, Zik saw that a grave had already been prepared nearby, and this person was going to bury the body, but for some reason he was too slow. The guy did not know who the deceased was, but he realized that the silent sword did not want to say goodbye to this person. Zik quietly approached the knight. He looked around in bewilderment, and the guy asked if he needed help. He said that even if a silent sword refuses, he still won't leave and help to bury the body and fall asleep the grave. Then Zik decided to introduce himself, calling himself Zik Moreda from the United Forces of the North. The stranger said that he was Dracy, but then he added that he recently abandoned this name, and in this they were completely similar. Both had a strange fate. It was then that the stranger said that he had chosen another name for himself, and recently his name is a silent sword. It was this man who was now standing in front of Zik and Reyna, and reminded the cadets of the rules that they knew from childhood. Reyna understood that she would fight until she loses consciousness or perish from the sword of Zik Draker. But then the knight said that they would not fight against each other, but together against him, it would be honest.